Excellent. So good morning, everybody, or good evening, or whatever the time of day is, depending on where you are in the world. We're super excited to welcome you to today's session, which is session number 2 of 8 of this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference, focusing in on the role of mining in the just energy transition. We've got an absolutely fantastic lineup for all of you today. And I've been informed that I'm 30 seconds early, so I'm just going to keep talking gently before I properly and formally kick off this morning's session, or the first session of today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time this week, we will share in the chat. So those of you who are in Zoom, we will share with you lots of links to different bits of information that were sent through to us yesterday, because as we go through the course of this week, we build a little bit of a repository or a library, not just of all the videos of all of our lovely speakers, but also any other information that is shared by all of the lovely attendees who dial into this session. So it is now 8 a.m. UK time, and I'm sure it's something different depending on where you are in the world. We've got the fabulous Carlo all the way from the Philippines. We've got Ezeb and Michael dialing in from Ethiopia. We've got Tim and Michael from somewhere in the UK, Ludovine from I was about to say from Belgium, currently in France though, there we go. And Rose, who's also dialing in from the UK here, sitting on the panel this morning. We've also got a host of other speakers. We've got Dr. Paul Pritchard, who's going to come to speak to us about all things climate and carbon and what's happening with all of those different rules and regulations. We've got George, who's going to speak to us about mining manganese and different ways of doing it. And we've also got Alexandra, who's going to be joining us from the Fair Cobalt Alliance. So it's a fantastic lineup that we have for us this morning. For those of you who are dialing in on Zoom, just some admin and some etiquette. So as you will notice, we're using the webinar function within Zoom. It's not that we don't want to see and hear you. We very much do. This is purely so we can try and keep some control with regards to proceedings. But the main ways in which you can interact with ourselves here on the panel and also one another is in the chat. And I can see there lots of people are dialing in and saying hello from South Africa, from Perth, Australia, from Ireland. This is fantastic. Feel free to send one another messages in the chat. Also feel free to pose questions to our panelists in the chat. You've also got the Q&A button that is somewhere down there at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to post questions in the Q&A as well. And what we will do is we make sure we'll bring them in to our fantastic discussion that we will no doubt be having over the course of the next few hours. For those of you who are listening in on YouTube, and Rose, would you be able to just post the YouTube link for everybody into the chat? So just in case watching this on YouTube is easier for you than watching this on Zoom, do feel free to go and have a little look at that. So I'm just going to go and open it up on my own screen. And yes, it's all working, which is great. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, do feel free to post your questions, comments, ideas in the chat there as well, and we will bring them in to our Zoom-based conversation. We've also got Twitter, we've got TikTok, we've got LinkedIn. So again, if you want to engage with conversation via any of those other platforms, then please do feel free to engage with us on that. Now, lots of us were, and see Pauline Cook has already started the conversation in the chat. How many of you were able to engage live yesterday? Now, for those of you who didn't manage to engage with us, don't worry, because it will have been the middle of the night for quite a lot of you, especially Carlo in the Philippines, and those of you who are dialing in from Australia. So my sincere apologies for starting the conference at such an impolite hour of the day. So that wasn't very fair of us. But this is one of the reasons why we're running this conference with these sort of slightly strange times. So starting at 8 a.m. UK time and running through to 11:30. So what that means is hopefully it is still an okay time for the likes of yourself, Carlo. Is that correct?
It's actually not bad. It's about 3 o'clock here. So the ones in Australia is what I'm a little concerned about.
So it's 3 o'clock for Carlo in the Philippines. I can check on my special app and find out what time of day it is in the likes of Sydney. I'm sure somebody can help me out in the chat at the moment.
5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. Not mistaken.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah,
it's not too bad. Excellent.
Still too early for beer for there, you know. So.
Yeah, so do feel free. You can join with tea, with coffee, with water, with juice, with tequila, with whiskey, with beer, whatever takes your fancy. To be honest, the thought of a tequila right now for me at 8:04 in the morning doesn't fill me with a whole lot of excitement, I have to say, but then maybe I'm weak. I don't know. So whatever takes your fancy. Excellent. I've got Rose laughing already this morning. This is good. So yes, so it is a decent time of day for the likes of all of you lovely people dialing in from Australia, the Philippines, etc. Obviously, for those of us who are in Europe, Africa, we're the ones being selfish with regards to this conference, because it's an okay time of day for us as well. With regards to the second session of today, that starts at 3 o'clock UK time and runs through until 6:30 in the evening, which, yes, is really horrible for those of you in Australia and the Philippines, but it's much better for all of our friends in the Americas. So in North and South America, especially all of those lovely people who are based on the Pacific coast. So yesterday we were joined by lots of our friendly Canadians and Latin Americans, etc., which was really, really great to see them be a part of it. If you want to catch up on everything that happened yesterday, what you can do is you can do this in one of two ways. And actually, I'm just going to share my screen. Is you can either go to the YouTube channel, okay, which I've just clicked on here. And what you will see is that there's a special channel that's been set up, which is for the 2022 conference. And what you'll see is you can either click on specific videos, okay, for each of our speakers from yesterday afternoon, or if you just want to watch the entire thing. Okay, so this is a whole sort of 3.5, 4 hours worth of scintillating entertainment, all for free. We don't charge for any of it. Who knew? Maybe we should get a contract with Netflix. I don't know. Would that be within our boundaries, Rose? I don't know. We could try it. And so what you can see here is we've got the entire recording from yesterday, from the Monday afternoon session. So apologies, we're just using UK timing with regards to morning and afternoon. In this top box up here, if I clicked on that button, you'll be able to see, let's just click on it now. So here is the session that we've got right this second. Just for those of you who are watching online, just a warning, the YouTube is running a few seconds behind the Zoom streaming. So if you really want to listen to things with a weird echo, then turn on all of your sound and you'll be able to hear things with a weird echo. If you're getting a strange echo, then have a play with your sound settings and turn something off, because that will make things much, much easier. So that's what's going on YouTube. Another way to catch up on what happened yesterday is to go to the website. So here we've got the Responsible Raw Materials website. I'll just go to the homepage. Okay, and if you click on the 2022 conference, you will see here is the main landing page for this week's events. Here we've got the schedule. Okay, so if you want to go and check out what the schedule looks like, so here are all of our lovely speakers from the session that we're about to go into now. Lots of them have been truly amazing, and they have sent us through some abstracts. So if I click on the abstracts page, that then takes us into our talks tab. Let me just make that a little bit bigger. And what you can see here is, for example, so Alexandra, who's going to be speaking later on this morning. If I click on Alexandra's area, you can see that Alexandra has been fantastic and sent through a little abstract with regards to what she's going to speak about. There's also a little biography for Alexandra and also some contact details if you want to get in touch with her as well. So this is what is sitting there on the website, ready for every one of you to engage with today. What we've also done overnight, and this is a massive thanks to Rose, to Ludovine, and Ludovine's wonderful other half, who, by the way, apparently likes hot cross buns. So I'm just sort of writing my list of things that we need to send to Ivan to say thank you to him, is if I go to one of yesterday's sessions. So for example, we had Olga, who came to speak to us about the deep sea mining simulation that she'd been putting together. What you can see here is Olga did feed us through some information, but you can see we've already loaded her video into that box. So what that means is by the time we get to the end of today, maybe tomorrow, it takes us a little bit of time to edit these videos, is every person will have their abstract, their biography and their video, provided they've given it to us, and it will be there in this little bundle of joy. So if anybody wants to go and find out more about Olga's deep sea mining simulation, all of the information you will need for that will be here. Rose, is there anything else you want to say to everybody about the talks and everything that's been loaded onto the website?
Ludovine has also very kindly written a blog that summarises yesterday's session, which is in the 2022 Monday PM panel session.
Excellent.
Yeah, there we go. So if you just want a very quick update on what we spoke about yesterday, then you can click on that link.
Fabulous. Cool. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to stick that into chat at the moment, because it is a fantastic write-up from yesterday's session. So what you can see here is we've got the panel session from yesterday afternoon. Hang on a second, it's not there, but maybe I need to hit refresh. Or unless Rose, if you want to share your screen, it's not appearing for me at the moment, but I think that's just the northeast of Scotland getting in the way.
Just the link to the blog. There is.
Hang on a second. There we go. That's it. Sarah's just having a little bit of a slow moment. So there we go. On LinkedIn, there is the blog that that Ludovine's put together with regards to what happened yesterday. So please do feel free to engage with that. Add in your comments, add in your ideas, challenge Ludovine with regards to what she said she thought she took away from yesterday's session. We always like challenge, don't we, Ludovine? And really take a look at what it was that we spoke about yesterday. Now, we're going to be trying to do something similar for this session right now. So trying to really encapsulate everything that we're discussing here. So the reason why I'm showing you all of this is if you didn't manage to join us yesterday and you want to find out what on earth was it that we actually did yesterday, please go and take a look at that blog. And so in about, I don't know, 30 seconds of reading, you should be able to catch up with all of those ideas, those challenges, those concerns and areas for optimism that we discussed during yesterday's session. So lots of information being pulled together this week, which is absolutely fantastic, which takes me into today's wonderful session. Now I'm going to invite all of our panelists to turn on their videos if they can. And I'm just going to do a quick lap around the room to see if you can just quickly tell us what your name is and maybe something interesting about what you're going to be speaking about in today's session. So Dr. Carlo, if I come to yourself first, I'm going to go to Azib next. So Carlo, do you want to just say hello to everybody and a quick advert for what you're going to be speaking about?
Hello from the Philippines. I'll talk about the mining situation here. Interesting.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Carlo. Really looking forward to it, especially because, of course, you've just had your election, which we've all woken up and we're all reading the news about at the moment. Now to Ethiopia. Azib, what are you going to speak about? And then we'll go to Michael. Oh, and you're on that mute, lovely lady.
Sorry. Okay, my name is Azib. I'm going to talk about some project achievements in regard to environmental activities.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Azib. I'm really looking forward to that. Michael, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Paul.
Okay, thank you. And my name is Michael Mulgeta, and I am from Akobo Minerals, and I'll be talking about the company's ESG performance so far and what we are intending to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michael. I'm so looking forward to this because Akobo has been doing some amazing things. It's been truly brilliant. Great. Paul, how about yourself? And then we're going to go to Michael and then we'll go to Michael Barron. I'm going to say people's surnames so that we don't get mixed up between the Michaels and the Michaels. Paul, how about yourself?
Oh, hello. Thanks, Sarah.
So Paul, your sound's really, really soft, by the way. Now we can't hear you at all.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. It's the voice from on
in
high.
The microphone is always a good idea, isn't it? My name's Paul Pritchard. Now you can hear me, and I'll be talking about what's coming down the line from the finance sector in terms of challenges to organisations.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. That's going to be fantastic. Michael Barron, do you want to say hello, and then we'll go to Tim Law?
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Barron. I'm based in the UK, and along with Tim, we'll be talking about the implications for companies of contract transparency.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Tim, maybe contradict that? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Tim Law, and I didn't know we were talking about that. No, we're specifically going to also talk about the opportunities for businesses of contract transparency, not just the challenges. So yeah, that's us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tim. That's brilliant. And Alexandra, how about yourself?
Hi, everyone. So I'll be speaking on the role of multi-stakeholder actions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alexandra. And then, of course, we have George as well from Gyani, who will be talking about the mining of manganese and some novel techniques that they're utilising there. George, unfortunately, he can't be with us today, but we do have a recording. So don't you worry, we're not going to be left with that empty hole in our agenda. So awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think it's going to be great. So one final thing before we just pass across to the fabulous Carlo for his initial insight with regards to mining in the Philippines. Those of you who were here with us yesterday will remember that we did one or two little Mentimeter activities. Okay, and so one of the things that we did was we asked everybody, where are they? Now, I know that into chat, lots of you have already been saying where you are, but what I've done is, now if I just share my screen, I've made a fresh map of the world. So where are you right now? I'm going to copy that link, put it into chat, which will hopefully make it a little bit easier for people to engage. So if all of you want to go and click on that link in Mentimeter, if it works for you. If not, just tell us again in chat where you are and we'll add you into this map. Where are you? Because it'll be really good just to see what kind of diversity we have with regards to geography around the world. Excellent. So we've got quite a lot of Europeans at the moment. I think they've come in nice and fast because they're obviously closer to me. Excellent. There we go. Fantastic. And I know there are one or two of you in Australia as well at the moment. So what we'll do is we will just let that gently collate, because it's really interesting for us to be able to see where in the world people have been dialing in from. Great, that is absolutely fantastic. Cool. I'll just let that run. The other thing that we did yesterday was we asked everybody, what do they think the just transition really is? And we got some fantastic descriptions, some fantastic input with regards to that, because of course, a just transition means something different, to be honest, to most people. And we need to acknowledge that diversity when we're then having a discussion around, okay, well, what could mining's role be with regards to the just transition? And Ludovine, I don't know if you want to comment on some of the different suggestions we had that came in there. Sorry, I know that I'm putting you on the spot rather than teeing you up for this.
No, I was looking for my mute button, story of Zoom. I think what was interesting is that the just transition definitions that came flying in yesterday covered really 360 degrees around mining. So there was a lot of focus, of course, on how mining needs to interact with its direct context and the fairness of its relationships with impacted communities, with nature around it. But there was also a lot of consideration of what happens once mining produces a mineral. All of that supply chain is part of creating the minerals that are needed for a green transition. But every step of that supply chain is also about jobs and fairness. And a lot of the topics we're going to be discussing here, how these funds flow, how they're transparently, how benefits are transparently shared across the supply chain. So it was interesting to see that all of us together sort of circled around mining from every angle and every aspect.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Ludovine. It was absolutely fantastic. So, I mean, something just to show you actually some of the suggestions that came in yesterday. Let me just share my screen again. if you want to add to these as well, everybody who's dialed into today's call, you can see that we really did have some fantastic diverse suggestions that were coming through with regards to what everybody thinks is actually meant by that just transition. So very much that theme coming through, where transition for all to whatever level is desired without causing any people or environments harm. How can we make use of this change, etc. So there were lots and lots of really, really good suggestions that came through with regards to that yesterday. So I'm going to leave this open during the course of the next hour or so for anybody, if you want to add into this ideas board, please do feel free to do so, because we acknowledge the fact that this concept of a just energy transition does mean different things to different people, and that is absolutely fantastic. So with regards to that, I'm just going to quickly nip across to Rose to see if she's got any final messages before I welcome our first fantastic speaker to the stage. Rose, anything final that we need to be aware of before we get cracking?
No, I don't think anything final to say. I'm just very looking forward to it. So let's go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rose. So everybody, if you could please put your hands together for the absolutely fantastic Dr. Carlo Achilla. So Carlo, if you would, yes, exactly, give him a round of applause, everybody, dialing in all the way from the Philippines. So Carlo, if you would like to share your slides, if you want to start off with that, that's totally up to you. So if you'd like to share those slides, I can see the Zoom buttons, the PowerPoint buttons being clicked at the moment. Fantastic. And obviously, as most of us will very much be aware, the Philippines had an election over the last 24 hours or so. Carlo, do you have any comments with regards to the election?
Anyway, kind of a difficult question, because the winner won by more than twice the second one.
Wow.
But many of the youth favored the losing candidate. So it's kind of a, so it's I'm keeping silent about it, because there are many hurt feelings in the Philippines right now. But there are also, it's democracy. That's what democracy is about. And I'm glad. I mean, it's a fantastic demonstration of democracy, that in spite of whatever other people say. Anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Carlo. And thank you very much for your very careful comment with regards to that. It's very much appreciated. So everybody, I would please like to welcome to the stage the fantastic Dr. Carlo Achilla, who's going to give us some insight with regards to mining in the Philippines. Round of applause. Thank you, Carlo.
So first, yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. And then thank you for inviting me. I am a professor in the University of the Philippines, but I am on loan. I actually head the nuclear agency in the Philippines. So people ask me, what are you doing? What does nuclear have to do with mining? I mean, I still do mining research. So I've been doing this for some time. Everybody knows this statement: if it can't be grown, it has to be mined. But what does it really mean? And I borrowed this from Carl Levinson. We cannot, I suppose you know this, we cannot escape the need for minerals in our daily life. And actually, interesting thing, I used again this slide from Carson Levinson, because there's a lot of concern in mining. But if you actually look at the actual footprint in Germany, in the Philippines, it's actually very small. But for some reason, in the media, it's portrayed much bigger than what it is supposed to be. For example, in the Philippines, here it is on the left side. By the way, in the Philippines, the mines are owned by the state. So you will have to apply for mining applications, and then you're given a license. The red are the mining applications, and the operating mines on the right side. So you can see everybody applies, but then only a very small amount are actually mining. So most Philippine citizens haven't actually seen an operating mine. So only 0.3%, a very small amount of the Philippines actually is being mined at the moment. One of the problems in the Philippines is actually more than mining, is the deforestation. And this is it, from 1900s, we had fantastic forests, and you can see the decline over time. And this is not caused by mining, but many times it's attributed, this is caused more by politics and some previous leaders opened the forests to just abusive forest contamination. Now let's go now to nickel. Now the Philippines is one of the biggest producers of nickel, but nickel happens to be a part in early 2000. Most of the nickel were sourced from nickel sulfides, and Russia was the biggest provider. Nickel is used in steel manufacture, and the biggest steel manufacturer is China. And so they needed a source of nickel that's different. And the nickel oxides coming from called laterite ores are found at the top, at the crust of these ultramafic rocks. And you just basically skim off the top of those mountains, and then you already get 1 to 2% nickel ores. And if you do that, as you can see in these pictures, you basically take out huge swaths of land, and then when the rains come, the silt goes into and it's horrific. The pictures like this can make anybody squirm where your nickel is coming from. Okay, so these are, for example, pods like that. But then, on closer study, this is a study done by my former student and colleague in one area in the Philippines. Just finished his PhD at Edinburgh. He says that most of the siltation comes also from areas that are outside mining areas, about 90% of them. But when you are doing mining, I always say mining is ugly, and they tend to associate everything evil with ugly. I mean, it's unfair to the ugly people so because I say that mining is a temporary land use, and when you're having a mining operation, it is really ugly. But until you rehabilitate it, you can only judge it after rehabilitation. And these are examples of rehabilitation that's happened in the Philippines. PLX is one of the biggest mining companies. When they were mining in 1999, if you look at it now, it's highly rehabilitated. The same thing in Zamboanga del Norte, south of the Philippines, mine area, and now rehabilitated. And this is an active mine, the one in Palawan, southern Palawan. So the active mine is in the foreground, and then the rehabilitated mines are in there, in the background. And so you can visit and see these places. Now, an interesting thing too is this: 1%, only 1% of the Philippine GDP comes from mining. And people say, if it's only 1%, let's get rid of it. Okay. What they don't understand is that in the mining areas, like here in Mimaropa or Caraga, it accounts for about 25%, 20%. Manila, for example, is zero. We don't have mining in Manila, so we can get rid of it. But if you look at those places where the mining are actually happening, you cannot get rid of 25% of the, and this is actually interesting when you talk about responsible, what do you do to the people here if you take out 25% of their income? And in Palawan, actually it's interesting, Palawan is considered one of the most beautiful islands in the world. I mean, if you haven't been here, I highly recommend that you come and visit. Mining versus tourism income. The tourism is 10 billion, but then mining quarrying is about 23 billion. Now, interestingly, this island is a very long island, 500 kilometers. The northern part are all of the tourists, but southern part are ultramafic rocks. So the tourists go to the north, the mines are in the south. But again, how do you balance this thing? This is Palawan, by the way, one of the pictures there. It's only a small picture. It's a fantastic place. I mean, I wouldn't want mining happening in this kind of place, But if you go to this, you can search Palawan, and then it's a beautiful place. The past president appointed a secretary, Gina Lopez, who unfortunately died of cancer a few years ago. She was very, very pro-environment, but she did she canceled mining permits in watersheds, just like blanket cancellation. And I was at university then, and I said, you cannot do that because, practically cities are there's a misunderstanding what a watershed is. But so many industries suffered here, including my students. But in the Philippines, the real culprit are what we call small-scale mining. Okay, for example, the Philippines the gold production of the Philippines, 70% of it comes not from big mining companies, but from artisanal mining. And in the artisanal mining, they use, I don't have time to present it, they use mercury, and then you can see mercury poisoning happening. And I would argue that it's better that if you had a big mine with the cyanide, at least it's all. And then they only need permits from governors and without vetting of technical personnel, no geologists. And so you have a big, use mercury, uncontrolled cyanide, they don't pay taxes, they pollute, many accidents. And the problem is that these are put on the press, and this is the picture of mining in the Philippines from this illegal small-scale mines. This one, I took this picture myself somewhere in northern Philippines. They call this a small-scale mine. This operation is huge, you know. I mean, how can this be a small-scale mine? It has its mill and everything. It was just dumping all of its tailings all around the place. And unfortunately, there's a Chinese buyer. I mean, who's just buying this illegally. Yeah, this is a closer. Now it's destroyed, but I was just here a few weeks ago, and in fact, with some UK scientists, we want to study how we can recover some of the metals from the tailings here using deep solutions. So it's to try to help the environment. Here's another example of illegal mining activities: chromite, mined from the underground without permits. It was a time that China was having a huge demand of steel, and they needed chromite. By the way, China has no chrome and nickel in its geology, so they have to import it. And so there was a pressure to get this from the Philippines. Now, nickel became such a big thing for steel, but we are, I think, the Philippines about the second. Russia, we've overtaken Russia already, and then of course, and Philippines and Indonesia are supplying the nickel coming from the laterite mines, and these are the ones that I presented to you earlier. The problem in the Philippines is that we export most of that nickel without processing it, and so we're only getting a small percent of the income from the LME, unlike copper that is processed here. And so, in-country processing is an important consideration when you talk about responsible. So this is it, and there's also now very interesting. The past 10 years, cobalt. In the university where I studied, I was wondering, we were exporting millions of tons, 30 million tons of raw ore to China every year. And we're only getting paid for the nickel. And I was thinking, what else is in those raw materials? So using ICP-MS, we studied the raw materials, and oh my God, what were there? There was cobalt, there was scandium, there were rare earth elements, and we were giving this free. And actually, cobalt now is very important because it's one of the most important elements, as you know, in batteries. And the biggest source, 70% is in the DRC. And there are problems, political problems there. Now, we have cobalt 0.1 to 0.2% in our nickel ores. It's still nickel ore, but there's cobalt there. A graduate student of mine just finished her PhD in Japan. She's now a professor there. So we studied. This is basically, by the way, this is a nickel laterite mine. You can see how ugly it is. It's all red because it's all oxidized, and the red is the laterite ore, and this lighter tan one is a saprolite ore. It's richer in nickel. So basically, what these guys do, just get it there, put it in the dump truck, put it in the ship, and goes a slow boat to China. And this contains also water. So can you imagine if we actually process this on site? Our discovery showed this. This most important here is that, of course, you have scandium in ppm, but most importantly, there's cobalt there in 0.1 to 0.2% in these ores. And up to now, we had just been giving this away. So it is unbelievable. And then there's also the issue of corruption in the Philippines. Why do I say this? Some companies were selling the ores for 35 dry metric tons, but China was importing about 55. So someone is transfer pricing. So, and in order to do this, they have to bribe very high levels of government. And you know, and this and I've talked about this publicly. I have a paper that described. They said, why aren't violators of this being prosecuted, because the Philippines gets taxes from this, and it's an egregious violation. So the Philippines supply in the world material criticality, we're a rich source of copper, nickel, and if you process the nickel ores locally, cobalt and scandium. And then and actually this is I heard that there's some business people attending this, and if you could partner with some Philippine mining companies to process this locally, you will not only help the country but also help the local people. Why do I defend the industry? It's because I teach. For example, these are my students. I brought them to a mining company, and then they got training, and then they also did planting. 100 students there. And by the way, this is interesting. This is a tailings of nickel processing. You can see the soil is 50% iron. That's red. Okay. And they're still able to grow some things from it using some technology. But this is incredible. This is in Palawan. And these are some of my students there looking for gold. We have a lot of female students crossing, rivers, and these are not timid rivers, And this slide is very important. These are indigenous peoples that are working in some of the nickel exploration areas. I taught them how to use GPS. Now, in this area also are found, believe it or not, in the Philippines, still have communist rebels. And many of the communist rebels come from this kind of people that I've been working with. And I think this is one of the most important slides. Why? Because in this slide, these are the indigenous peoples working with us and doing exploration. And then there are some illegally cut logs. But the soil they are stepping on is nickel laterite ore. So I asked them, why do you cut the logs? It's illegal. I said, we have no other means of livelihood. But then if you started mining, this is about 1 to 2% nickel ore, they could be employed in those mining companies. So this kind of, that's why I said it's enigmatic. I mean, how do you balance this? And I don't know if many people have seen these situations on the ground. So these are my students crossing the river, and that's all my 10 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm open to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carlo. Absolutely brilliant. Massive round of applause. And I can see already from some of the messages that I'm being sent in the chat that there are 1 or 2 university professors who will be using your talk as a little bit of a case study in the coming months or years for their students as well. So isn't that fantastic? Carlo, a couple of questions have been coming in whilst you've been talking, and one of them actually is from Ludovine. Ludovine, do you want to pose your question to Carlo?
Well, yes, thank you so much, Dr. Achilla. You give a pretty damning picture of mineral governance and how it needs to evolve. I'm particularly curious, there's definitely an opportunity for local processing, both to add value, but also to, quite frankly, capture some of these markets. Is the state putting in place any policies to support or incentivize this type of investment? And is there an ecosystem that allows for this kind of investment? Because oftentimes it's the first link, but the rest of the chain needs to be available to take the product to market as well.
Thank you. Excellent question. In fact, there's some processing. For example, for nickel, there's a company called Nickel Asia that's actually processing it using high pressure acid leaching, HPAL. And they're selling it, they're partners with Sumitomo, it's a Japanese company. And so the government allows it, but the capital requirements are huge. I mean, an HPAL plant costs about $1 billion a piece. That's why actually one of the things we're doing now with some UK scientists is to see if we can even avoid mining by what we call deep eutectic solutions, in situ mining. We're in the initial stages of that. If that's successful, it will actually take out the whole process of, I'm still skeptical, but very hopefully skeptical. So it can be done, but we have to ease corruption. That's why I know it's another question from Michael Barron on EITI. We are doing EITI, but unfortunately not all of the mining companies are. And I have to say this, some Chinese companies have used some Philippine citizens, because, by the way, the ownership of Philippine mining companies as fronts, and they are not members of the EITI, the Transparency Initiative. I love this EITI because it will help in the transparency initiative. That's why it's there. But not all of the mining companies are members. It's voluntary. So the practicing responsible mining companies want to be members so that they can be, they know that they are, and there are responsible mining companies. And as I said, a big part of the bad picture is not really the big mining companies, but the small artisanal mines. It's a complex issue. It's a whole, we can have a whole day talk on it. On some of those communities. I mean, it's much like the California, the much worse than the communities, 100,000 people for gold rush and stuff like that in the Wawa. Anyway, I hope I answered your questions.
Awesome. No, thanks for that, Carlo. Michael, do you want to, I know that Carlo was multitasking and read your question in the chat already, but do you want to comment on that from a transparency perspective?
Yes, I mean, obviously, I'm already aware that obviously the Philippines is an EITI implementing country, and hopefully some of the information is putting out into the domain is useful. One of the weaknesses, as you rightly identified, one of the weaknesses of EITI is it's dependent on companies cooperating, and actually, yeah, EITI is voluntary for countries to join, and the Philippines has made that decision. But once it's joined, this is maybe where the government, maybe civil society, and the companies that are cooperating with the EITI need to play a stronger role in persuading the companies that aren't cooperating to cooperate and provide the numbers. So once a country signs up to EITI, all the companies operating in that country, all the mining companies or oil and gas, as it should, especially if their revenues are deemed material, should be cooperating with it. So that's something around the governance of EITI. That says something around the governance of EITI in Philippines, and it's a challenge not just in the Philippines, but in many countries. But yeah, and just to kind of flag in, we'll come back to this issue maybe when Tim and I talk about contract transparency in later on today. But thank you for your presentation.
I can answer partly in addition. I mean, it was high-level corruption. I mean, I can't. I'll be sued if I mention details. But I have witnessed. For example, my students and I discovered the transfer pricing. And I said, if a university professor and students discover transfer pricing, why can't the government do this? And the reason was some people in government very high up were involved. One mining person after they put up a huge building in the financial district, and we know where that money comes from. And she was the one responsible for this transfer pricing. And so this is what I'm saying. I mean, that's so egregious. If they check their own records, or transport permits are public documents, they would have nailed these people. So, issue of corruption.
Yeah. It's a very difficult situation, isn't it? So I think with that, I know that we've got more questions coming in the Q&A at the moment. So Carlo, I'm sure we can point you in the right direction for those. And Sagar, who is getting going with your questions, are absolutely fantastic. We'll attempt to answer them with as much detail as we possibly can. So with that, everybody, if you please put your hands together for the fantastic Dr. Carlo Achilla. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Great. Amazing. So we're going to go from the Philippines to Africa and to Ethiopia. And next to our virtual stage, I would love to welcome the fantastic Azeb. And also, I think that we've also got one of your colleagues with us as well, Mr. Fitzum. So fantastic. Thank you so much both for you joining us here today. Azeb, if you've got slides or anything that you would like to share, please do go for that now. And I will hand it over to your lovely selves to introduce yourselves and give us a little bit of an insight into the Zoom project. And we'll hear all about what that means very shortly with regards to environmental stewardship in the mining sector of Ethiopia. So at the moment, just so that you're aware, we can see your PowerPoint working version rather than the presentation mode.
Okay, I will understand.
Perfect. Excellent. So everybody, if you'd like to please put your hands together for the fantastic Azeb, and let's fit some round of applause. Great. I can see the Zoom buttons being pressed behind the scenes at the moment. It's all good. I shall fill until we get there, because it's horrible having to multitask and find those buttons with regards to that. Okay, we can see it. That's okay. Cool.
Thank you very much for having us. I will let our Deputy Director of the project to introduce the project first, and I will go to the environmental details of the project.
Thank you, Azeb, for the introduction, and thank you all for having us. My name is Som, and I'm the Deputy Director of the SUN project. The SUN project is supporting Ministry of Mines project. It's a GAG-funded project based on the request of the Ethiopian government, specifically the Ministry of Mines, to improve the governance of natural resource. As you all know, Canada is one of the mining jurisdictions, and they govern their natural resources well. So we want to learn as much as possible from them, and not making the mistake of others in irresponsibly managing resources. And Dr. Carlo just give us the highlight of what that can look like if you are not taking leading practices from other companies. So saying that from the other countries, saying that it is a 50 million Canadian dollar project, focusing on identified gaps by the ministry and the Geological Institute of Ethiopia and regional mining bureaus. And the ultimate goal is to increase revenue, employment opportunities for women and men in Ethiopia. And once actually the project is not prescribing solutions, it is rather user driven, or it is themselves who do the gap analysis, and then international leading practices will come into play, and then after validating what is required, then we move to the implementation. And based on the identified gaps on mineral licensing, on governance, on environment, and also on geoscience information, the project supported the ministry, the Geological Institute of Ethiopia, and regional mining bureaus by deploying international experts to build the capacity of the officers at regional and federal level, and also to provide enabling infrastructures, ICT infrastructures, to manage mineral licenses better, to share and organize geoscience information data better. So it actually lays a foundation for responsible resource management going forward. The systems put in place right now, regional and federal level, work with them seamlessly. And the idea is, with the government of Ethiopia taking ownership and sustaining these interventions, to do more transparent natural resource governance at lower administration levels as well. So that is basically what we were doing in the past more than 5 years. And we are at the final stage of the project, where we are working on sustainability and exit strategy. And we are pleased with how things are unfolding and how receptive the regional and other stakeholders who took part in this initiative take it strongly, and would like to further strengthen the management of it, bringing the transparency and making Ethiopia a responsible mining jurisdiction going forward. So I think with that, I will leave the floor to Azeb to give you a highlight on what environmental activities we have done. We have worked on to formalize artisanal mining. It is just a pilot, and we work on environment and gender. Specifically, we would like to empower women in the mining sector, and we are advocating for that. And we work with regional mining bureaus doing gender audits and coming up with gender mainstreaming guidelines and other documents that should guide the regional mining bureaus, the federal levels, and others to take the example and not being gender blind in their assessment of projects, programs, and any development initiatives for that matter. So as if the floor is yours, if you would like to give the audience on what environmental interventions we made in the past 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Fitsum. Mr. Fitsum described all the project's activity, but I will specifically discuss on the environmental activities that some projects have done for the last 5 years. So after identifying the gaps in the mining sector of Ethiopia, the major thing was the capacity gap in the government and regional officials. So we were able to give training on environmental and social impact assessment, occupational health and safety, and also community development. So we try to identify most internationally known organizations, for example, the IGF and the IAEA. So we contracted them to give certified trainings for the regional and federal environmental experts, and also for academicians in the regions. There are a lot of universities that can work closely to the mining society. So we also include them on the capacity development trainings so that they can transfer their knowledge to the locals immediately, since they are close to the mining sector. And one of the other thing is that the policy gaps that we also identified during the inception time of the project. So we also conducted a lot of researches on the legal framework of Ethiopia on the mining sector. And one of the gaps was in the environmental impact assessment area. So we also do work with the UBC, University of British Columbia, and develop a roadmap for Ethiopia mining sector on environmental impact assessment. There is also a self-assessment diagnostic tools developed for as a whole in the world, but they implement it in Ethiopia and see where the gaps are. And the other big issue was in the ministry. They are the compliance monitoring agency or authorities, and they don't have any lab equipment that they can go and check whether the mining companies are working properly and disposing their water and other wastes to the environment. So we also able to buy them environmental lab equipment. So these are the activities that we do. The major thing that we can say and highlight is the preparation of a directive to regulate the allocation of community development fund from the exploration and mining company. In the legislation, it was not really specific to put these kinds of funds by the mining companies, but in 2019, with the support of some projects, we tried to prepare the directive and they implement it. So we can see the difference after having these directives implemented. There are a lot of community development projects properly implemented to the local community, and also the capacity of the local and the regional mining bureaus on managing these kinds of projects. So it's really a big issue and achievement for the project when we discuss about environment, social, and governance issue. So, for example, we can say we were having research on before introducing this directive for the last 10 years. The ministry were able to only implement 8 community development projects with the support of mining and exploration companies. But after introducing this directive, within 3 years, they were able to implement 22 community development projects. So it's really a big deal for our country to have these kinds of regulatory things. So the next thing that we are planning is to have a study mission for the regional and the Ministry of Mines, since the government of Ethiopia is also shifting its interest to artisanal mining in the sector. It's better to have really a good experience before going into detail and work in the artisanal mining, since it's really a big issue which can degrade biodiversity and also the poison water sources in the area. So we are planning to have a benchmarking best practice environmental practices in Mongolia, since they are also a good example of ASM sector. We are having this mission in May. So hopefully it will be a very good chance for Ethiopia and the Ministry of Mines to have these leading practices from countries like Mongolia. So this is really a good opportunity for Ministry of Mines. And this study mission also include the empowerment of women in ASM. This is one. So the other is the gender mainstreaming. As a cross-cutting issue, we also include gender in all our activities. So as Mr. Fitzom stated in previously, we produce 3 knowledge products for the country with respect to the mining sector. So we produce a gender strategy, gender mainstreaming guideline, and a gender training manual, so that they can use it in a sustainable way to manage the gender issue in the mining sector. So, and there was also a study, as Mr. Fitzom said, to identify the opportunities for women in ASM and the small scale mining. So that study provide us with a number of opportunities for Ethiopian women in ASM. So one of this is the training and the empowerment activities, the supporting women in cooperative and associations, improving technology for ASM miners, and addressing health and safety issue. Since in developing country, mostly occupational health and safety is not an issue, but it's really affecting the local community and also the miners. And also the climate change adaptation and mitigation is one of the opportunity for our country, since we are on the verge of having a mining era. We have to consider these things and do well. So when we come to the artisanal miners, I think it's better if it's continuous.
Thank you, Azib. For artisanal mining, we made a number of study missions in Latin America, North America, and also some African countries like Kenya, and produce a roadmap to guide the formalization, an informal way of doing mining is actually the main, we identify the main cause of environmental degradation and pollution or through use of toxic chemicals. So we actually produce a roadmap in consultation with stakeholders. All the study missions conducted, the knowledge gained from the study missions lead to the development of this roadmap that now translates into local language and is used to guide the formalization of the ASM sector. Because the ASM sector is really important, and most of the ASM activities happen on the Nile tributary, which supports the livelihood of more than 40 million people. And these tributaries, if not protected, if we are not aggressively addressing the gap in knowledge through various sensitization workshops and through various trainings, then it is going to be too late. So we just piloted a formalization initiative, and people were the artisanal miners were very interested. And when we were showing them videos of the Minamata disease and others, they were shocked. And if people are unaware, the harm is not going to stop at the community level. This Nile tributary is not only a source of life for Ethiopia, but also neighboring countries like Sudan and Egypt. So we really have to work aggressively. And I hope the government of Ethiopia will take this initiative to work with other development partners to bring the desired impact on that. And we also shared these products, the knowledge products, the roadmap with UNITAR, who are also interested in producing a gender chemical use roadmap. And so we are very much interested in seeing the sector do their mining responsibilities responsibly. That is why we are pushing them to reclaim land, and this Mongolian study mission will give them an additional knowledge on mercury-free technologies, on frugal land rehabilitation techniques that can be adapted to Ethiopian context, and we will protect the environment while socially, responsibly conducting ASM activities. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, sustainability and exit strategy, because most of the time we see the gap in the ministry that knowledge products are not shared effectively, and people are reinventing the wheel and resources are wasted. So this project would like to be an example, and we developed a knowledge portal. We put all our products over the 6 years as open source, and all of you can access. We will leave the link to you. All of you can access the products developed in the project's lifetime, and it can be accommodating more resources for the government to refer to and conduct responsible mining going forward. Thank you. I think that's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you. I mean, so impressive what's been put together over the last 5 years and everything that you're continuing to do. So everybody, if you please put your hands together to say a massive thank you to both Zeb and Mr. Fitsum. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, just with regards to time, we are running a little bit tight on time at the moment, and I can see there are lots of comments beginning to come in saying that we're really impressed actually by especially the gender and the artisanal and small scale mining initiatives that you've got happening at the moment. So just one question from myself. You're learning from, or you're going to go and work with the Mongolians to find out how they are doing things. Are there any other countries or parts of the world that you have worked with closely to try and draw on some of those good practice? And actually, are you seeing other countries learning from you?
Yes, study missions has been conducted at Peru and Chile, because they are also good mining jurisdictions, and also Miguri, Kenya, and also with the delegates from the ministry also visited Namibia. and also Yukon, Canada. These and at the culmination of all this, now the delegates will travel to Mongolia, trying to formalize the ASM sector and properly govern it and formalizing and forming associations. If you want to eradicate poverty, you have to, you cannot give a blind eye to 1.2 million people who are directly working on artisanal mining and nearly 6 or 7 million people indirectly working at the sector. So the leading practices are learned, but a lot needs to be done. We are not claiming to cover all of the needs of the community and the artisanal miners there. We identified their gaps through studies for opportunities for women in ASM, and also this Mongolia study mission will give additional input. But if development agents, in partnership with the Ethiopian government, act on it, the sector has a huge potential to protect the environment, at the same time improve the livelihood of many people. So that's what we strongly believe.
Fantastic, thank you. Azib, have you got anything to add to that answer?
No, everything is said by Pritchard, but I don't think that is, until now, we don't have delegates come to Ethiopia and visit the Ministry of Mines, but investors and mining companies are really coming to Ethiopia since the Ministry of Mines are participating in international conferences like PDAC and Indaba. So the country's mineral resources are introduced well there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So, I mean, I think with regards to this and looking at some of the questions we've been having coming in on the Q&A as well, actually by really getting to grips with the artisanal mining and as you were both mentioning there, the sheer number of people who are involved in the artisanal and small scale mining and making sure that the well-being of those individuals, etc., is enhanced where possible, is truly fantastic. So thank you so much for coming and joining us here today. Absolutely brilliant. Round of applause. Fantastic. Great. Now, sticking with Ethiopia, we're now going to move to our next speaker. So talking of one of those mining companies, Michael Mulugeta, if you would just like to hit that mute or unmute button so that we can bring you to our virtual stage. So Michael is here from Akobo, and I'm sure that he's going to tell us a lot more about what it is that they are getting up to with regards to really enhancing, well, or really showcasing what you can do with responsible mining practices in a country that is as fantastic as Ethiopia. So Michael, over to yourself. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me in this conference, and it's a great pleasure for me to represent Akobo Minerals, to present its ESG activities recently. And I am currently working as ESG manager for the company. And before I go directly into the ESG aspect, I would like to say a few words about the company. It is a Scandinavian-based company that is registered in Euronext, and it has an exploration and mining license in Ethiopia. And recently we have an interesting discovery mine. That's because of that, and we have the mining license. And in addition to the mining license, we still continue some exploration activities to further upgrade our resources in the area. So we have a strong management team, as you can see here, and being a responsible company within the executive management, we have Dr. Catherine McCallum, our head of ESG, who's experienced in socioeconomics internationally, and she also have a PhD in sustainable livelihoods and global learning. Not only at strategic level, but also at operational level, as we have the geologists, the drillers team, we have an ESG team that is actively working in dealing with environment, social, and governance issues. As I have said, we recently discovered a mine in a place called Dima. We call it a Segale mine, and SRK reports recently indicated that we have both indicated and inferred resources. And this is a very great opportunity for us to start a mine and move on forward and do some further exploration in the meantime, and so that ultimately we have we will establish a resource that will be estimated to be 1.5 to 2 million ounces of gold. So just to give you a little bit of background in terms of where we are operating, we are working in Ethiopia, in the southwestern part of the country, and it is at the border with South Sudan. And in the area, we have the Surma pastoralists coming from the south, and there is also a refugee camp in the area that is for South Sudanese newer migrants. And because of the gold potential in the area, we have artisanal miners from all over the country flooding to the area and doing some artisanal mining activities there. Back in the years, there were a history of course, some conflict between Anuak and Nuer. As you have seen it in the previous presentation, we have recognized that there are unregulated small-scale alluvial mining activities in the area. And most interestingly, we have also Anuak diaspora that are interested to advocate environmental and social well-being of their homeland. So, you know, unfortunately, we are going in the area because of some unregulated activities. We are going from, as you can see from on the right side, you see a picture which is covered with green and pristine environment. And because of some mining activities, we are coming to an area which you can see in the right, which is very degraded and really for us, it's really worrisome to see this, and we like to bring this back to the green. And in order to do that, it's not only the effort of one company or the government. It has to be a concerted effort, and everyone has to play its own role. And as a responsible company, first and foremost, we would like to be legally compliant. And towards that goal, we have been supporting the community through community development activities. And in addition to that, we have conducted an environmental and social assessment studies, and we are legally cleared to do our mining and exploration activities in the area. And we have also a strong ESG team ready to deal with any sort of environmental, social, and management issues, all the way from executive management level to the operational level. And most importantly, it's not only complying with legal requirements, but Akobo initiated a program which is known as Sustainable Natural Resource Management Plan. And this is done in collaboration with Sazani Associates and a non-profit for-profit organization that is working in sustainable livelihoods of rural community. And what Sazani has done in the area is they do some research to develop the Sustainable Natural Resource Management plan, and the researchers included preparation of remote sensing, preparation of land use map using remote sensing data, and also desktop study. And in the field, they have done some participatory natural resource mapping, where we have this printed out large map and gather the community to show us what they do have, where they do have it, and also what activities are going on in the area and where it is happening. So in addition to this, we also try to capture the significant changes in the area, what was there like 5 years back, and what do we have there now, and what will happen in the future with all the activities going on in the area. So Sazani's research work and preparation of the Sustainable Natural Resource Management Plan enabled us to identify our output areas where we would like to intervene in terms of ensuring sustainable livelihood for the community where we are operating. And most importantly, the artisanal miners who believe that artisanal miners has to shift from how they are operating into some other form where we have where we have them using technologies and ensure environmental and social safeguard. And it's also important to work on vulnerable communities like the women in terms of improving their livelihood. And since we have including indigenous agricultural and pastoralist communities in the area, it's also good to work to improve their livelihood. And also without a proper awareness and education, of course, it's practically impossible to realize any of what we intend to do in the SNRMP. And for all of this to happen, there has to be a proper management structure. And with this in place, we believe that we can have a program that can be promoted because that can be eligible for climate finance and acquire any sort of finance available out there. And as a follow-up of the completion of the SNRMP, we have done some multi-stakeholder dialogue with the community back in March 2022. And outputs of this, what we did during this multi-stakeholder dialogue was we gathered the community, various groups of the community, including women, youth, and also participants from the local administratives there in Sagale locality, Chamo locality, or Sagale Chamo Kabale. And they have been presented or reported back the results of the SNRMP, and how to move forward were also discussed. And they were happy to hear about the SNRMP in general, and we heard or collected some relevant information from them in terms of what they would like to have after the implementation of the SNRMP, and the priority areas, and how the management structure would look like. All these were discussed during this multi-stakeholder dialogue. And in addition to this, at the end of the workshop, we have asked the participants if they will be interested to work with us. And the majority of them showed interest. And what we are planning next is to have each one of the people who showed interest to categorize. We already categorized them into interest groups, and we will have a meeting very soon to have nominees from each to establish a community, liaison committee that will help us a bridge between ethno mining and or Akobo minerals and the community, and also throughout the implementation of the SNRMP, the committee members will participate in various activities of the SNRMP. And collaborations, we already working on the SNRMP together with Sazani. Sazani is a company that have established the SNRMP plan, and also implementation and follow-up of this program will be done by this company. And also would like to closely work with other like-minded people and companies and organizations. And as you have heard in the previous presentation, you can see that there is a lot of alignment with our project. So we would like to work with projects like SAM, STEM, and others. And so that is pretty much what I have in terms of our ESG activities in Ethiopia. And any questions that you have, you may ask me and we can discuss. And also you can send me any questions that you have through my email here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. I mean, with regards to that, again, massive congratulations with regards to what you are very proactively doing with regards to all of this. I'm just going to stop sharing your slides from this end so we can see you properly. And I think with regards to that, your community liaison committee coming in with the ecosystems rehab, the awareness and the education, and then the training and livelihoods, there's a really lovely resonance with what we heard from the previous speakers, I think there as well, which is fantastic. Do you have any comments actually on what the previous speakers were saying? I mean, especially with regards to perhaps your interaction with the less regulated mining, so the artisanal and small scale mining, and how you're managing that.
Yeah, so yeah. Obviously, as a private company, our business portfolio is called mining, obviously. But being a responsible company, we are showing interest to do some advanced workers in terms of ESG. So our success can be obviously an interesting showcase for other companies to follow. So what should happen is initiatives like SAM and others should, I think, closely work with companies like Akobo, Sazani, and the like, in order to deliver what they have to the ground level, so that instead of their documents and all the interesting results that they have achieved so far would sustainably pass to the next generations. So I think it will be better for some and other projects to engage interested mining companies in advancing sustainable livelihoods to the communities, to various parts of the communities across the country. That is, I think, what I can say. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much for that, Michael. Now, just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next speaker, but please do, if and where you've got questions for Michael, please do put them into the chat and we'll make sure that he gets them. I just think this is an absolutely fantastic example of where that international mining organization actually is truly engaging with what's happening on the ground. So brilliant. Another round of applause for Michael and Akobo. Brilliant. So that now takes us, we've actually sort of changed direction ever so slightly. So Dr. Paul Pritchard is joining us next. Now, Paul, I saw carbon credits mentioned once in Michael's slides there. Now, I know that you have your thoughts with regards to planting trees, etc. But he's thinking, yes, maybe. But Paul, do you want to introduce yourself and then perhaps give us an overview with regards to, okay, what is changing in the world of finance, especially with regards to sustainability, climate change, etc. at the moment?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. And yes, I was listening with interest to Michael about talking about the broader ESG and did notice the carbon credits bit. My background, as Sarah's mentioned, is very much in the finance sector, a lot around due diligence. So I was originally an environmental person, and it covered asset management and insurance primarily, particularly around risk management, but I've also been involved with banking and venture capital to some degree as well. And what I'm actually going to talk about I think does relate in many ways to the issues that Michael was raising, but also I think the other issues that you've already been thinking about earlier around ESG issues, around just transition issues. It is approaching it from a slightly different direction. So I think I would see this as complementary rather than something that's more of the same. It's actually coming at it from a slightly different approach. And I suppose one thing to say, which I don't know if it's surprising or not, is that probably the mining sector hasn't been a particular focus for the finance sector until now. I think there is a historical interest, particularly from the ESG community, and particularly about license to operate and those sorts of aspects. But actually in a lot of the initiatives that have been appearing over the last few years, the focus has been very much on other sectors, particularly those associated with climate change and very high or high proportion of greenhouse gas emissions. And so those sectors, those industries, I think are already in the debate, and they're already arguing their case for we should get this treatment or that treatment. And I suppose in some ways what I'm going to say is if mining wants to be part of that and wants to be treated appropriately, it actually needs to get to the table and understand what's been discussed in the finance sector and what the potential implications are. And the other thing where the initiatives that I'm going to talk a little bit about differ, I think, from lots of ESG or just transition or stakeholder kind of initiatives to date, is that a lot of this has actually come from within the finance sector itself and is actually concerned with from the sort of national banks, the international regulators around banking and insurance. And the concern has come about the impacts of sustainability, climate change in the first instance, but broader sustainability as well, the impacts that climate change would have on the financial system, on the global financial system. And look, the first step, of course, is that is saying, well, the banks, insurers, investors themselves, their own operations are not particularly impactful, typically small offices. So it's very clear very quickly that the major financial risks associated with sustainability to the finance sector sit within the people that they lend money to, that they invest in, and that they insure. So that's the first thing that, and it was kind of a big step, I suppose, for the sector in starting to say, we need to understand what's going on within our client portfolios. And about 5 years ago, the first major initiative in this came out of the Financial Stability Board, which was set up after the financial crash to look at these sorts of issues. And they came up with a set of recommendations called TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And we're really just starting to see the finance sector getting to grip with what they actually mean and what information they actually need from their clients and how that might impact things going forward. And I'll get onto that in a little while. But I suppose that there are two main areas to this. So first of all, and I think both areas have actually come up in the conversation this morning, and I'm sure yesterday as well. The first is that if we think about climate change, where the initial focus has been, there are very obviously risks to organization looking forward associated with climate change, and typically associated with greenhouse gas emissions with their own operations. So there needs to be an understanding, or the finance sector needs to understand what's happening in terms of emissions from the organizations that they work with and finance. So that's one side. That's the kind of risk side, or one element of the risk side. And the other is, of course, that climate change has physical impacts. It changes extreme weather, flooding, drought, and so on. That also has an impact on organizations, and the bank, the insurers, and the investors want to understand that. Is this going to threaten a particular business operating in a certain location? Is it going to threaten it financially? So there's a need to get the information to facilitate that. The other side of the coin, which has come up, is that the transition to a low carbon economy, to a sustainable economy, requires that certain industries develop, that there are innovations and so on. And I think it's that opportunity side as well, which probably hasn't been focused on so much, but I think is particularly relevant to the mining sector. And if we're thinking about these conversations with the finance sector, then both sides need to be addressed. So it's the sector needs to think about, what are we doing about our own transition to a sustainable economy? And that includes just transition as well as greenhouse gas emissions and impacts on nature and so on. So have we got a clear pathway for our individual organization or for our sector so that it aligns with what we want to see in future? And that can be pretty challenging in itself. And the other side is, actually, because of all the policy decisions and all the changes that are going to be made, and the need for electrification and so on, and the need for battery storage and renewable generation, all this, what industries are actually going to have significant opportunities arising out of that transition? So it's the two sides of it there. And as with any transition, there are going to be financial winners and losers, and losers and winners within the sector as well. So certain sectors will be adversely affected for sure. And I think, again, a lot of the focus in the finance sector is concerned around coal mining. And for good or bad, mining in many people's minds in the finance sector is associated with coal mining. So it kind of fits there. So I think there needs to be an understanding that these are very different types of industry, and that it isn't just one sector with all the same characteristics. And going sort of further than that, looking at the individual sector, there will be organizations, just like Michael was saying, there are some organizations that are on top of this and understand this and can provide information and addressing these issues. And that's great. And these initiatives like TCFD should be hugely beneficial to those organizations, because one of the key risks, well, there are two types of primary risk, if I put it like that. The physical risks associated with climate change. So they're saying that's the extreme weather and everything else, and how organizations prepare for that and how mines prepare for it. What happens if there's restrictions on water? What happens if there's increased flood risk? Those sorts of physical risks. But probably nearer term, there are water term transition risks, which would be around legal changes. And I think as well, particularly important, the risk of financial institutions being subject to legal action for not doing what they say they're doing, and also reputational aspects with customers, stakeholders expressing concerns about financing certain practices. So what we're seeing now is the kind of understanding of how these schemes might operate within the finance sector. And there are particularly technical challenges associated with how they look at these things. And then that should drive better disclosure around these issues, and this is me being positive and optimistic, assuming it works properly, that we should see better disclosure around that. And following on from that, recognition of the good players as being the ones that have access to finance or preferable access to finance, and disfavoring the ones that don't meet the criteria that we want to see associated with the transition to sustainability. So I think it can be really powerful, and we're seeing TCFD become mandatory in a number of countries, and the US has also just kind of joined the group, and it's the SEC in the US is actually just publishing guidelines on this. It doesn't use the word TCFD in there, but it is TCFD in all but name. So there are the particular technical challenges around this, and I know a lot of organizations will be already facing requests from investors for ESG information and disclosure and questionnaires and all that. And this sort of newer or developing area of challenge is probably going to add to that in some ways. And it's going to pose slightly different challenges, because these are not necessarily just about the impacts on the environment and on the local community and how certain issues are being managed, but it's actually about the internal strategy of the mining organization, and what's the business plan look like, and is it robust enough to deal with the sorts of changes that are coming further down the line, and not just within a sort of 1 to 5 year timescale, which would be normal to finance. I know mining thinks longer term than that, but this is probably looking over periods of decades. With the net zero at 2050 is the sort of talking point, I suppose, the major talking point now. But as part of that, there's also what's happening by 2030. And targets for greenhouse gas reduction, protection of nature, and so on. The social issues, which I know, again, have been talking about a lot today, are in there. They're not as prominent as climate and nature, but they are in there. And I think everyone's expecting those to rise in prominence. It's fair to say climate has been the primary focus, partly because it's probably easier to measure and easier to put a financial value on. So I think that's probably the main reason why that's first. Of course, it is a critical issue that we need to address quickly. So if we're thinking about the sorts of challenges that are going to come out of this to the sector, absolutely for sure, it's going to be about disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions. And that certainly covers operational sites. But one of the key things that it does cover is beyond operational sites. So what about in the materials and things that are sitting in the supply chain and downstream as well? So there's going to be a look at an interest in the whole value chain, and I suppose that links in quite closely to the idea of where are materials coming from. And you might be dealing with a large company, but actually, is it getting things from smaller scale, less transparent, whatever sources? So I think that there will be pressure to get that transparency along the value chain, particularly in certain terms of greenhouse gas impacts in the first case, but more widely around nature and social issues going forward. And with those sorts of impacts, the next step is really how those impacts are going to change over time and how they relate to the strategy, business strategy of the organization. So we know for sure that the sector is going to be involved in net zero, and that's sort of 50% of the conversations that I hear now is net zero by 2050, and how are particular sectors going to get there? Net zero in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So that for sure is going to come up in conversations in what's your plan as an organization to achieve net zero with interim targets at 2030 around that. So that relates to own impact. The other side of the coin, again, which has come out today, is what is it you're actually producing and what do you plan to produce, and how does this, how is the market for this likely to develop in the context of net zero pledges and actions by government over decarbonisation, electrification, and so on. And I think that, again, it's kind of been raised earlier, but I don't know if it's been pushed strongly enough, if I put it like that, actually a lot of the materials that have been produced are critical to the transition, and assuming the impacts are managed, the operational impacts are managed, what are the opportunities around this? And two of the challenges are, firstly, that this involves looking forward over periods of decades with masses of uncertainty over things like the actual physical impacts associated with climate change, but also the policy environment that this happens within. So there's a lot of discussion about a very significant increase in carbon prices, and that being used as a mechanism to drive the transition. So one of the things will be, what happens if the price of carbon goes up to $200, $300, $400 a ton, for example? You know, how does that affect your business? And are you resilient to it, and can you accommodate it? So I think that those sorts of questions fit into the sorts of approaches that people are applying. So most typically termed scenario analysis. So people look at different futures and say, how would our business look under this future? And what does that imply? And what do we need to do now to think about where we want our business to be in 2030 and 2040 and 2050 and so on? So that's pretty new. It's actually not new to all sectors, but it's pretty new in many ways to the finance sector, and they're just kind of getting their head around it. But they will be pushing organizations to actually do these sorts of exercises so they can understand how they're positioned. Following on from that, we also have the developments of auditing and accounting standards. And I suppose one positive thing about this, in an area where we're getting multiple standards and lots of organizations coming out with initiatives and net zero, race to zero, finance alliance for net zero. So you can choose lots and lots of initiatives, and new ones appearing every day. It does feel like we're starting to get some consolidation in this space, whereby the finance sector is working with the regulators, is working with the auditors to get some consistency over measurement and disclosure. In the first case, this is very much climate related, so it's about greenhouse gas emissions and resilience and action and research and development and involvement in activities that will support the transition. So it's kind of in that space. Coming down the line, pretty closely afterwards, are the related TNFD, which is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And again, I think this will be resonate very strongly with the sector, given the sorts of the nature of operations and the location of operations and the environmental sensitivity of many of the operations, that this is actually looking at dependencies on nature provided services and then links into things like biodiversity as well. And I will actually say a little bit about carbon credits, because that is a part of the whole picture. So carbon credits and the idea of getting credits or offsetting for planting trees, if I put it at its most basic, a number of years ago, kind of received a lot of criticism. And I think there's a lot of concern around that. And there was a kind of move away from saying, you know, we really shouldn't be doing this. It's actually come back into the agenda much more. And I think there is the compliance market kind of operates at the national level, with countries saying, you know, we want to finance certain activities such as afforestation to generate the credits that we need to meet our own internal targets. But I think interestingly as well, developments at the kind of corporate and voluntary credit or voluntary market level, whereby it's been seen increasingly as a good thing that organizations get involved with and start to invest in areas that are maybe outside of their direct scope of activity. So this could be any organization, and actually start to support activities that improve carbon sinks and avoid deforestation and support reforestation as well. So it's actually a really interesting time from the looking at the risk and the opportunity, but also looking at the development in the voluntary carbon markets, with the appetite to actually support these going forward. Again, the critical thing in my view is about the good governance, transparency and disclosure. And overall, I will actually stop in a minute. Sarah hasn't stopped me yet, and sometimes when I go on, yeah, you do, but this one appropriately. So I think the key things that I would take from this are that TCFD and related initiatives are happening. This isn't at the discretion of individual banks, insurers, investors deciding that they want to be more active. They're being required to do it by national and international regulators. So it's going to happen. And it's going to tear down to the challenge to the people, to their clients, and that preparation for that is going to be helpful. And the result is going to be that within sector, there are going to be those organizations that are well prepared for this and have the right data and are going to benefit from it. And they're going to benefit from improved access to finance and so on. And investment, and there are going to be those that suffer from it bluntly, that can't meet the requirements. And transparency actually will be a key concern, because if you don't have the data and you can't understand it and you haven't assessed your business model, then you know that's a risk in itself, and not least a reputation risk, so which is a current risk as well as thinking forward. So I think a lot of these things look slightly abstract and one step removed, and in a sense they are, but actually they're coming down the line and they're going to be really important, and they should complement the sorts of sector-driven initiatives and ESG initiatives that we've been talking about. So I'm actually going to stop there, and I don't know if this prompted any questions or comment.
So I think with regards to that Paul, it's always absolutely fantastic to hear you talk about all of this, because there's so much change that's been going on in that world of finance. And the thing is that it's here to stay. We have to do it.
Yeah.
It's been driven with regards to, say, the financial impacts. We know there are broader impacts with regards to that. And actually, I'm going to just go straight to our next speaker, Paul, and let us take those questions just into the chat, just in the interest of time. But one thing I would mention there that I think was really interesting was that mining at the moment isn't at the table with regards to all of this, despite the fact that it's mining that is going to be providing the vast majority of the materials needed for the energy transition. And also, depending on how we mine, we generally create huge volumes of emissions, and then beyond that into the potential impact on nature, the potential impact on communities, etc. That is absolutely huge for all of us. So I think this is something here, and obviously we've been speaking with a number of different organizations over the last year or so. At present, mining isn't even at the table where we need to engage with discussion. And I think that that's something where we need to work with the world of finance. We need to work with all of those other individuals who hold the pen on things like climate change, et cetera, to make sure that as an industry, both including large scale mining and artisanal and small scale mining, all of us, we're actually considered in that. So awesome. Thank you so much for that, Paul. As ever, truly brilliant. Round of applause. Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Cool. So from that world of finance, you heard Paul talk a lot about transparency, about reporting and recording, etc. That is a kind of a segue into our next fantastic speaker. You see what I'm trying to do there, Alexandra? So now we've got Alexandra Lucumber from the Fair Cobalt Alliance. Alexandra, so glad to have you here with us. Cobalt has already been mentioned a number of times today. Are we surprised by that? No, of course we're not. But everybody, if you want to put your hands together for the fantastic Alexandra, thank you very much.
Hi everyone. So I'll be sharing my screen just to show you.
Oh yeah, and your sound is a little bit spiky, I think would be one way of putting it. We could hear you, but it sounded like the microphone wasn't quite connecting.
Can you hear me better now?
That is much better. Thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen and
Fantastic.
show. Yeah.
Cool. I can see Zoom thinking about it. It's beginning to share. So just while it's sharing, Alexandra, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll confirm that it really is sharing?
Okay, so I'm Alexandra Lucumber. I'm from DRC, and I'm based in Kinshasa, the capital city, and I work for the Fair Cobalt Alliance, and I'm in charge of relations with the government and the national stakeholders. I don't know why the PowerPoint is not sharing, but I can start, and then whenever it's
do you want to try and stop and hang on, it's doing something, it's thinking, or we stop and start?
Can you see it?
It's loading. Yes, we've got it.
Okay.
It's because it's such a fantastic picture, that's why it took its time. So Alexandra, over to yourself.
Okay. So as I was mentioning, I represent the Fair Cobalt Alliance. The Fair Cobalt Alliance is a multi-stakeholder action platform that brings together actors from all across the entire cobalt mineral supply chain to provide an answer to the increasing scrutiny on ASM cobalt mining and the DRC mining sector. So we have an office in Kolwezi, so in the province of Lualaba in the southern part of the DRC. And I am based here in Kinshasa as I represent at the national level. And we believe that this platform is important because we know that 70% of the world's cobalt is coming from DRC. And out of the 70%, about 10% or so is from ASM Cobalt. So the ASM sector is very important as it is a source of revenue for about more than 100,000 people when you combine the two provinces, so the Lualaba and the Okatanga. So it is a really important source of income for the population. So if we look at the project that we have on the ground in Kolwezi, there are three pillars that we focus on, which is the dignified working conditions, child labor remediation, and then the increase of incomes for the mine workers. And if we look deeper into the work that we do, in terms of safe and dignified working conditions, we believe that it requires investment into safer infrastructure, training of workers, and introduction to improved management systems. And our target for this is cooperatives with whom we work at a local level, but also association of women washers. So just to give a quick background, a lot of the women that work on the ASM mine site are the one washing the minerals, whereas the male are usually the ones that dig and go into the different tunnels. So for us, it is really important to work with those two groups and to ensure that their working conditions are better. And if you see in the bottom pictures, you can see that we have provided with the PPE, so personal protection equipment for the women, as they go every day into the waters, and usually the water is polluted. So the direct interaction with their skin and the water is not usually, it's not ideal, as it causes a lot of diseases and infection and so on. So we have provided, together with the cooperatives, these wader boots that would allow them to rent them every morning prior to starting work. In terms of child labor remediation, we have been working with Save the Children and our local organization or orphanage, Maison Kwetu, to put together a child referral system, a child labor remediation system that complements the one from the ILO and the government's efforts into addressing the prevalence of child labor in this sector. So we believe that instead of just kicking out children from the mine site is not enough, there needs to be a continuous program to ensure that they do not come back into those mine sites, but are actually integrated into programs that will help them find solutions for the future. Now, in terms of raising of incomes, I think we believe that in order to increase the incomes, the steps to be taken is already establishing transparency around the trust in trading systems and increasing efficiency and per capita outcomes to increase the different incomes. But that being said, it is important to highlight that cobalt mining has been found to earn significantly more than the average Congolese minimum wage. So it is still very helpful or for the communities working in the cobalt sector, as they're able to make an income, especially with now the growing demand for cobalt worldwide. But that being said, it is very important for us to align with the governments whenever we establish a program to ensure that there is a continuity at all levels and that we're able to also be part of that change. So for every work that we do, we report back to the government, or at least we share our information and the progress on what we do. Quickly, I'm just going to explain what all these pictures are. So the electrification of schools, we have been partnering up with the Signify Foundation, who has been able to give solar panels to the different schools, allowing for children to be safer and for them to stay maybe longer hours to be able to study within their schools. And we have also started a saving groups, which has 60% of women and 40% men that are able to save money to either diversify their income so they do not have necessarily to stay in the ASM sector, but could maybe invest in other projects that they would have, and that would help them increase their incomes. And for first aid trainings, we still, under the dignified working condition, it is important to really ensure that the miners have all the skills necessary to ensure that they are safe at work, and they are able to also help. Are able to help themselves, like one of their colleagues, in case of accidents and so on. So in terms of our membership, you can see that we have a very diverse members, and that is because we believe in the multi-stakeholder approach. So it is important for us to work with actors all throughout the supply chain. So from the local level all the way to the downstream actors like yes. So at a local level, we have Glencore, who is also working through its mine KCC in Kolwezi, with whom we have direct relations on the ground as well. And they're also able to share their expertise with our team and with our local partners. So that's why we say that we really believe in the integration of all actors in the supply chain, so that it is key towards achieving a long-lasting impact. And also a multi-stakeholder approach allows for industry and civil society to work together in a pre-competitive environment. So if we look now at how the Fair Cobalt Alliance works, we can see that our members have understood this MSI approach and are involved in making a difference in their interaction with the ASM Cobalt by investing in long-lasting projects and having direct access to the local actors. And at a structural level, we have opted for a more transparent governance, where we have a member-based steering committee. So they are the one approving key decisions, but also a budget allocation. And when we look at also integral to our approach is working with local actors. So a lot of NGOs or international organizations that work at the local level often try to not work with local actors because they believe that they do not always have their capacities are not always built at the international to the international standards. And rather than running away from that, we prefer to invest in building the capacity of local actors. As I mentioned, we work with Save the Children. So for example, with the child remediation project, Save the Children was able to provide, to build the capacity of our local actor, Maison Kwetu, in order to ensure that even if today our program stops, at least they're able to continue it because their capacity have been built and they understand what the program is, and there is ownership to that program, and that program will then be replicable because it is really embedded into the local community. Also, in order to so we really do invest, and we try to co-design all the project with the local communities so that they will be replicable. So we have also launched this year our advisory board. We have launched it in order to continue ensuring to have the voices of different actors into the way that we work. So we have 2 representatives from the DRC, and one of them, which we are very proud of, is one representative of the Ministry of Mine. So it is really important for us to have all the different actors. So from the government level to the civil society, all the way to the international cooperatives. So that's how we want to do it. But it is also key to say that there is a very large number of actors that work in the ASM Cobalt sector, and there's a lot of competition, but we do not believe that that's the way to go, because there is so much to be doing, and all of us could be helpful to one another and really be able to complement the work that we do. So rather than competing, we really believe in cooperation with the actors on the ground as well. And we publish often our progress so that we ensure first the transparency of our work, but also to ensure that there is no duplication of works. If our informations are available to the people, rather than doing the exact same program, we could partner up and actually do further work in that sense. So then in terms of, this is what we have done at a glance in 2021. It was our first full year of operations because obviously COVID in 2020 slowed down a lot of our activities. So from the very beginning, we really operated with a multi-stakeholder approach by building relations with all actors from the local level to the international level. And it is important to state that the ASM sector is here to stay. And we believe that rather than running away from cobalt, from the artisanal mining, it is better to invest in it in order to ensure better revenues for the workers, but also to ensure that the conditions of work that they have are improved and would actually help people to get more development in the provinces. So that's what I had to share. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alexandra, and congratulations on everything that you are building. Now, I know that I'm being peppered with questions from left and right, which is great. The first one that's come in is amongst all of those fantastic logos from the different organizations that are involved. So be it Save the Children, Tesla, Glencore. Now, obviously, there have been lots and lots of reports that have been written about, say, the larger international mining companies. From a reputation perspective, how is that impacting on you?
We believe that it is true that those companies have had in the past a lot of reports that are being written, and I mean, one way to see it is, okay, we do not work with them, or they stay on their own and they just focus on their work. But I believe that if they join the Fair Cobalt Alliance, it's because they want to move not away from what they've done, but to kind of do better than what they've done in the past. So investing now into, actually, like I mentioned, we are a platform. So we are kind of a way of bringing those big corporations with the local communities that was maybe hurt in the past by what has been done, and really finding a solution together into now, how do we work from now on, and how do we then invest into safer ways of working, and taking into consideration all the fair and a correct way of now working with the local community. But it's true that it is Tesla, it is Glencore. There's always going to be, journalists that are going to comment on those. But I believe instead of, running away from that, it is best to directly work and really make a difference there.
So I guess making sure that dialogue, that engagement, that constructive momentum is actually there, rather than just saying, you're evil, you're nasty.
Exactly.
Okay, fantastic. The next question that has come in is, so there's been a lot of discussion about the cost of due diligence and transparency, perhaps unfairly borne by some of the poorest producers. How are you tackling that issue in your engagement?
So the question of transparency is at all levels. So it's the government that has to be transparent. It is the international corporation that are buying cobalt also that have to be transparent. So it is really at all level. And one thing from the conversation we've had with the government specifically is that they've built a trading center specifically for the ASM cobalt in the Lualaba area, and it's the Musampo Trading Center. And the idea for that is that every single bags of cobalt that would be leaving the country will be labeled, so we will be able to trace exactly where every single mineral is coming from. So that is already one step that the government is taking into the transparency and the traceability of the cobalt. Now, the biggest question with that is that, okay, then you're doing that, but how do you ensure that then the cobalt, even if it is traceable, how do you know that it is, how do you know that it is mined in a fair way? And I believe that is the work that we are trying to do, because there are CTC standards that have been put in place into seeing how ASM mine site is supposed to be operating. So the CTC standards are very high, but we believe that we can work in a progressive way into helping a mine. So take the mine where it is and then work towards the CTC standards in order to ensure that the minerals and the working conditions at that site are fair and secured for the miners. So I believe that, as you see, every actor has a role to play for the transparency and for the traceability of the materials that they mine.
That's fantastic. And I think you could see me getting quite excited when you said we're building that trading center, because certainly having really had the amazing opportunity to do a little bit of work in that region, it was the lack of transparency with regards to that full value chain of somebody digging the cobalt out of the ground, and then who do they sell it to, etc. So by pulling that together, that's an amazing step forward.
Yeah, and it kind of also removed that middleman kind of, where the diggers do not necessarily get their fair share of the money and so on. So yeah.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. So I think with regards to this, I could keep asking you questions all day, Alexandra. And I will actually just point to the question that's in the chat at the moment from Michael, which I'll pose to you in a second. But just for everybody else's awareness, over the last few years, we've had a number of talks that have been given to us by individuals discussing what's going on with regards to cobalt, what's happening in that incredibly rich, from a mineralogical sense, part of the DRC. I mean, this is almost where you get that kind of resource curse really coming to the fore, because it's so rich. So there are a number of links that Rose is posting into the chat at the moment. So one from last year, which was called Brittany Goes to the DRC, which is from Francesco Santinelli. So fantastic talk there. And also Estelle Levin-Nally, who's another fabulous expert when it comes, especially with regards to artisanal and small scale mining, but also understanding cobalt as a sector as a whole. So I think with that, just last question then for you, Alexandra, and feel free to comment on what I've just said as well, is from Michael in the chat. So what contribution was the Extractives Industries Transparency Initiative, or EITI, made it in the DRC to improving transparency of the mining sector, and specifically with regards to cobalt? Do you have any comments on that?
I do not have the specifics on it, but I'm sure that if we take the mining sector as a whole in DRC, there's always a lot of questioning about the transparency, about the role of those big, those large-scale mining companies. But the thing is, I believe there is a change, and more so there are actions being taken, because, as I mentioned, 70% of the world's cobalt is coming from DRC. And if the reputation of just the ASM sector is ruining it for the entire 70%, it's not just the ASM sector that will be banned from the international level. It will be the entire sector. So I believe that it is really key for every single actor to really play their role and really ensure that, you know, there's really something positive happening for the ASM sector. And instead of just running away and saying that we're never going to take cobalt from the ASM sector, it will cause even more issues. Because if you look at, for example, child labor, it is caused because of poverty. And if you do not buy then cobalt from the DRC, then it is that there's that increase of poverty. So more children will have to work then instead of going to school to provide for their family and so on. So, you know, there is that, but I think it's really good for more people to visit, you know, ASM sites in the DRC to actually understand how it works, and to understand that there has been a lot of improvement. If we look at the statistics now, they're very, I think, I don't remember exactly the number, but there's a very small number of children actually found on those on the sites. I've been to Kolwezi more than maybe 6 times, and I've never seen any children on an ASM site. So there really is an improvement into the work that is being done on the transparency of the different actors. Maybe not as much as we would want, but there is some improvement being done. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much for that. And I think just building on that, I mean, especially with regards to children, I'd give a little shout out to Estelle is giving another talk to us tomorrow afternoon, where she'll be exploring some of this as well. So Alexandra, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant. Massive round of applause. Thank you. Brilliant. Cool. So on the subject of transparency, it's almost like we lined up this agenda to have a nice little storyline through it, isn't it? So I would like to welcome to our virtual stage the fantastic Tim Law and Michael Barron, who are going to give us a little bit of insight into that contract transparency and other aspects of the inverse to opaqueness. So Tim, Michael, if you'd like to take it away.
Great, thank you. Hopefully everybody can both hear me and see the slide deck.
Yeah,
there.
Perfect.
So Michael and I are going to talk about contract transparency in the minerals sector, and not just focus on what is often the theme of such presentations, which is what the negative connotations or aspects of contract transparency might be, or the opportunities that it gives for identifying and tackling corruption and criminal activity. We're actually going to flip that slightly and talk about, well, actually, what are the positives, and not just what are the positives for governments, but what are also the positives for businesses in the sector for contract transparency. So I suppose the starting point of that has to be the question as to what contract transparency is. And I suppose the first point to say is that it's about the public disclosure of bear with me just a second, my screen has just gone rather funny. Okay, right, I'm back with you. Is the public disclosure of contracts, licenses, and other similar documents that grant rights to extract minerals. So by that, in some jurisdictions, it will be a regime where the extractive sector is governed by contracts. In other jurisdictions, they may be more like a license regime or permits. And I appreciate we're talking about minerals here, but in the oil and gas sector, it could be things like production sharing agreements. So it's that whole range of contracts and legal documents which govern the extractive sector. Now, in some cases, that can also mean those which cover the exploration phase as well as the extraction phase. So it isn't necessarily just looking at agreements to do with that phase of the mining life cycle. It can be all the way through from permits to explore on a particular patch of land. And what does disclosure mean? Well, this is going beyond having something like a cadastre system, which is, broadly speaking, maps and names. This is about going into what are the actual full details on terms and conditions in those license agreements. So it's about the publication of the full texts of licenses. And again, here we're not just talking about the head level agreement, the one that sets out, which particular patch of ground is it that the license applies to, which particular minerals does it apply to, what's the duration and who are the parties, all of which is obviously very, very kind of interesting and vital information. What we're looking at here is transparency in the whole suite of documents that support that license. So that might include documents that set out environmental commitments that companies have made as part of the application and granting of a license. It may include social commitments. So that could be commitments around levels of local employment or local supply chain commitments. It could be commitments that have been made to build particular bits of infrastructure, whether that's roads, hospitals, schools, or whatever. So it's all those commitments that are attached to and which become contingent to the issuing and continuance of that license. It applies to contracts and licenses between governments and private companies. So what this doesn't extend to in the application that we're going to talk about is contracts or agreements between private sector companies. This is about the agreement between host government and the company which is in a position then to exploit those minerals or explore for those minerals. So that's what we mean by contract transparency. And in general, what we're talking about here is governments or government agencies having a source online where anybody can access all of the contracts that are in place in that jurisdiction. So that's kind of the concept. Why is it a hot topic at the moment? I guess there are a couple of reasons. The first is that there is ongoing advocacy from civil society organizations to understand the contract terms and obligations. And that's about, you know, as in so other areas of transparency, it's about holding governments to account as to whether or not the terms and conditions which are contingent to the issuing of those licenses are appropriate, but also holding companies to account as to whether they are fulfilling the obligations that are contingent to them having that license to operate. So it's part of shining a light of scrutiny on both the issuing of licenses and what terms and conditions governments are expecting companies to abide by, and also whether those companies are doing what's being said. We've talked a bit about EITI already today. EITI introduced a more stringent reporting requirement around contract transparency in its 2019 standard. What that requires is that any EITI implementing country should put in place a process whereby any license or contract which is issued or amended after 1 January 2021 should be available, publicly available, and there should also be a list of all previous contracts available so that you can see what contracts are in place. And EITI countries are busy implementing those requirements as we speak, and Michael and I can talk at length about the levels of application of that in EITI countries and where we've helped them on another time. There's also an ongoing trend towards more transparency in mining operations and company behavior. I mean, this is something that we've seen for 20 years or more in terms of scrutiny of companies in the mining sector, whether it's around their tax behavior, their corporate social responsibility, environmental impacts, and I suppose, you know, most importantly, license to operate. And one of the key links in that license to operate chain is, well, what actually is it that businesses are having to commit to, and are they fulfilling those commitments? So that's kind of the landscape of contract transparency and what it means. I've already touched on the fact that there are jurisdictions which already have contract transparency regimes in place and are publishing large numbers of contracts. There are lots of EITI countries that are working towards publishing at least the newer contracts, and then over time that will mean that ultimately large numbers of contracts are in the public domain. But there are already contracts that are published. There are contracts that are published by governments. There are contracts that are published by the other party to the contract, the company. There are contracts which come into the public domain by other means, whatever that might be. And there is a central repository that is collecting and publishing those contracts already. And that is the resourcecontracts.org website. So what this organization, resourcecontracts.org, and Michael and I have no affiliation or connection with it. This is just you know, for your information, as that it's a resource that's out there. What they do is collate contracts and licenses which are already in the public domain in one way or another, whether it's that the government's already publishing them, the company's already publishing them, or they are being published by a third party who isn't party to that contract. They collate them and just publish them without sort of making comment on them, but it is a repository of contracts. And there are a lot of contracts there. So if you look, this is as of this morning, there were 2,777 contracts publicly available on the resource contracts website. Now, I will point out that in some cases those are the model contract that is available in a country rather than the specific contract that applies to a particular license. But there are 98 countries covered across that website and 69 different types of mineral resources that are covered in terms of combinations and permutations. So contract transparency is moving forward, and it is an area that we think that businesses as well as governments need to start taking notice of. And that's not just the kind of knee-jerk reaction, which is contract transparency must have a commercial downside because we're having to disclose the terms and conditions which are in that agreement, but actually the opportunity that responsible businesses have from contract transparency. So I'll hand over to Michael now, who's going to talk a bit about what those implications for businesses are and what the opportunities are.
Thank you, Tim. And yes, there are, first of all, talk about some of the implications of this for mining companies. And as always, there are risks with this, but as Tim's already alluded to, there are some opportunities as well. And this is the kind of, and also some of the things to watch out for. So if you are a company operating in one of the 56 or so EITI implementing countries, and we've had 3 of them, as if by chance, in Sarah's carefully crafted agenda, we've had 3 of them speak today: Philippines, Ethiopia, and the DRC. Then you're likely maybe already to have been exposed to this. The EITI Secretariat in those countries should, not in all cases, should be working towards meeting this requirement from EITI and putting in, if it's not already in place, putting in place a system to publish at least those contracts that have come into force since the 1st of January 2021. And even if you're not in the whether you're in an EITI implemented country or not, there is likely to be pressure and growing pressure from civil society organizations to disclose contract terms, to understand in more detail what commitments you as a company have made, not just commercially, but in terms of technical commitments, but also, as you already said, in terms of environmental commitments, social commitments, and so forth. Now, there are one of the reactions to this, or one of the pushbacks on contract transparency, both from governments and some companies, is that you can't publish contracts because it would cause commercial damage. The terms are commercially confidential. In many countries, or in many contracts, there are obviously confidentiality provisions which prevent the disclosure of information under the contract. There may also be laws in place, and we've come across, even in countries which have Freedom of Information Acts, commercial information is often carved out as an exemption to Freedom of Information requests. So I'll come on to kind of specific actions in a minute, but for companies, it is a need to understand what terms you believe are really confidential and could really cause commercial damage, and others which, if everybody, if contracts are published and everybody knows information, then actually it might put everybody on a more even playing field and create a more functional and dynamic market. And now there are also some other risks around that. As Tim's just pointed out, the resourcecontracts.org website is basically a library. So contract texts are just published there without any context, without any narrative around them. And there's a risk that in EITI countries and other countries, as governments try to comply with this, they just, as it were, dump contracts online without any context, and maybe misinterpreted by those who want to, for whatever commercial or other reasons. So there is a risk that as a company, you get put on the back foot, you're under scrutiny, and you haven't had time to react. There's also, but there are opportunities here for companies, and companies who take maybe a more strategic approach to this. It is if contracts are published, or publishing contracts also provides an opportunity to show that you are meeting the terms and conditions of the contract, that you are doing what you committed to do when you signed the contract, that and maybe exposing where others, whether it's the government, other specific agencies, are not meeting their contractual terms, and therefore, the reason why something may have gone wrong or there may be an issue is not because of something you've done, but maybe because of somebody else has done or not done. And therefore, when contract terms and obligations are in public, it's also an opportunity to influence the debate around contractual terms. Often the debate around, the contract terms aren't fair, they aren't equitable, and so forth, are done in an information vacuum where information about the actual contractual terms is not available to the public. And therefore, people end up speaking at cross purposes, asking for things which are either not realistic or may already be there in the contract, but just aren't implemented. So that's some of the implications for companies. Tim, if you could move on to the next slide. As a company, and this is aimed specifically at companies in the mining sector, what can you do about it? I think Sarah would be disappointed, maybe others on the call be disappointed if I didn't say undertake a risk assessment. But in all seriousness, you as a company do need to stand the risks about that. If a contract is put in the public domain, there will be information on price formulas, technical commitments, maybe production commitments, so forth, that will come into the public domain, and that may cause you real contractual harm or damage. So let's understand what terms you would really need to be kept under wraps and what can be made public. And there's been a lack of real debate and understanding about this. A lot of companies have not yet engaged with that kind of risk assessment, that kind of understanding, and really try to drive the debate about what can be made public and what shouldn't be made public. And often hiding behind a kind of, confidentiality provisions, or the law says we can't do this. The other action to take is understand the implications and the impact on other, this is part obviously of a broader range of ESG issues, probably falls mainly within the G part of that, governance, how contracts are reached, what terms and conditions, how they're implemented, how they're monitored, and so forth. But will have an impact on environmental, social issues because of the commitments you make under those in the contract for those issues, and also maybe impact on other transparency issues as well. And so specific things for companies to think about is really develop a policy and approach to this, an engagement strategy, do engage on this. There is a real risk that a gap opens up and therefore a threat to your reputation between your actions and your words. We've already seen this in the ITI world when some of the companies that support the ITI, especially some of the bigger mining companies that support the ITI, they say they support the ITI, but they've been silent or haven't provided any support on kind of contract transparency or made any moves to support the implementation of contract transparency in countries where they're operating, and so opens themselves up to criticism and scrutiny about their contracts and their approach to this issue. And if you are operating in EITI, one of the 56 EITI implementing countries, understand what the current status of meeting the contract transparency requirements is, where the country's got to, and is there an opportunity here for you as a company to offer support, engage on this issue, and be part of the debate rather than kind of sitting outside it and let it kind of come and wash up on your shore. So I think with that, I will finish speaking and happy to answer questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Michael and Tim. Massive round of applause for both of you. Absolutely brilliant. And I think it's always really interesting, isn't it, to, we've been talking about really tangible on the ground aspects of mining and some of those environmental and those human rights aspects. And one of those themes that's really coming through from this session today is the need for transparency, not just so we can hold one another and ourselves to account, but so that we can understand perhaps what's going on there. Now, before I come to the main questions that are in the chat at the moment, the first most important question, perhaps, Michael, is that a dog that you have with you?
Yes, apologies for that. That is my dog Mocha. I will post a picture in the chat in a moment. Sorry for that. She is extremely old. She's over 15 and a half now, and has taken to. So she makes a lot of noise when she gets up and about. And she's, for some reason, actually since the beginning of lockdown, she's taken to lying in this room. Apologies for that.
No, I have to say, Michael, your ability to carry on presenting during that is admirable, to be honest. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that. So everybody, the question has been answered. Was it a dog? Was it something else in the room with Michael? We now know. So coming on to the more serious questions, perhaps, not that Mocha isn't serious, of course. So from Pauline, what happens with regards to EITI with longer term operations, which may be working to historic contracts?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start on that, and Michael can then chip in. I think, as I said, the EITI standard requires new contracts to be disclosed, and it's interesting to think, why was that the decision that was made rather than to say that all contracts need to be disclosed? I think part of that was an acknowledgement of the administrative burden that there might be placed on government agencies to switch from a position where there are large volumes of, in many cases, paper documents, which would then need to be transferred into or changed into an electronic format in order that they could then be placed online through a repository. You can argue whether or not that's a reasonable excuse, but I think that's part of the reason, and an expectation that over time, as new contracts come into force, those will become public. I suspect that in the fullness of time, there will be an expectation that the EITI implementing countries go back and fill in with those contracts which are still in existence, but which are older. But I think that the main reason why that approach was taken by EITI, I suspect, is to manage the administrative burden that there is in moving to having those documents online. But Michael may have some other views.
No, I think that's right. It's a balance between kind of absolute transparency and practicality. So, for example, in countries where there's been a long history of mining, some of these documents and licenses may have been in place for hundreds of years, and there may be lots of them. So, for example, we've just done some work in Latin America, and in Mexico, there are 24,000 current mining licenses in place. So, publishing all those, putting all those online is the Mexicans are trying to do it, but it's a massive undertaking. Some of those licenses, as I say, have been in Mexico, which has a long history of mining. Some of those documents have been in place for over 100 years and have been amended, obviously, several times in that stage. So there's, and obviously, it's not beyond current technology to put all the kind of masses of documents online, but it does take time, effort, and resources.
Yeah, and particularly as sort of going back to the very start of our presentation, it's not just one agreement, potentially. It's potentially lots of sub-agreements that cover things like environmental commitments and employment commitments and those sorts of things. So it's not just a matter of kind of one per block, if you like. It's potentially then multiple agreements, and also, quite a lot of background work to ascertain exactly which of those agreements are still relevant and therefore should be included, or which have been amended or superseded. So I think that's part of the challenge.
Great, thanks for that, both. Ludovine, I know that you want to come in on this.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. Great presentation. I was wondering if you're getting a lot of feedback on, I would say, the ripple effect of this transparency. A lot of the discussion that I've been hearing is about the fact that publishing all of these contracts really spotlights capacity issues and the imbalance of capacity between negotiating parties. So transparency would be step one, because it informs all stakeholders. But the next steps after that are to say, okay, what are we seeing in these contracts? What's the content, and are you seeing discussion arising from that?
I mean, I think just to sort of set the scene for that, maybe Michael could comment on that, but to set the scene, there are a range of different approaches in different jurisdictions. So some jurisdictions, the majority of the terms and conditions that govern the mining sector are set out in law, and the contracts are actually relatively light by design, because most of the terms are already set out in either in law or readily available public documents. In other jurisdictions, the law is very light, and the licenses or contracts are actually very heavy in terms of the terms and conditions and obligations on companies. And different countries sit in different places on that scale. And I don't think there isn't a right or wrong answer, and there isn't. It doesn't necessarily feed into the comment you're making directly in terms of whether countries that are where there is more of a disparity, you see them at one end of the scale or the other. I'm not sure. Obviously, to the extent that information is already in the public domain through legislation, then contract transparency becomes potentially slightly easier because there's less in there. In terms of that debate about disparity, I'm not sure I've seen it particularly. There's, contract transparency is still at quite a kind of nascent level. There are some jurisdictions that have done a lot in that space, and those are, in some cases, those are the ones that have got the sort of the better developed and longer history of the extractive sector. But in other jurisdictions, there's kind of very little being done. So I think at the moment, we're still at the phase where jurisdictions are saying, what is it that we can put into the public domain, and what does that then mean? I haven't seen a huge amount. I think the use case for that information being in the public domain, like so many of these things, is that kind of phase. That next phase is, okay, that's great. How does that really get used, that information? Michael, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think that's right. And building on from that, it's in a lot of cases an early stage, and in some cases these documents have only been available for maybe a matter of 2 or 3 years. And it also speaks to a comment in the chat about access to digital systems and access to communications. I think part of the next challenge is communicating what's in contracts, what are the implications of the contracts to the communities where it matters. And that is something that EITI is only, for example, is only just starting to do. And in some cases, kind of digital networks, communication networks are not as robust as they should be. Again, using the Latin American example, in the Dominican Republic, which puts all of its contracts online and they're all available. The problem is in the communities, in the mining sectors, the infrastructure just isn't there for communication. And also, these are big, complicated documents. So putting them in a format that you and me and others can understand. I mean, I spent over 12 years in the oil and gas sector. I still couldn't claim I understand the production sharing contract properly.
No, just by way of example, the front page of a contract, which was on one of our slides, which was an example from Mexico. I've just looked, that's 190 pages long. So I agree entirely with Michael. I think there is a real question about how you move from a place where, undoubtedly there are calls for contract transparency, and undoubtedly there are good reasons for it. But there's also a real challenge in moving from, Mexico has hundreds of contracts that are made public, and if they're all 190 pages long, dense legal text, that is not necessarily going to be particularly useful to local communities who are trying to understand whether or not the operation that's on the edge of their community is complying with the environmental commitments that it made when it was issued a license. Now, that doesn't mean that it isn't a stepping stone towards communities being able to achieve that, or for that company to be able to demonstrate that it is meeting the obligations that it signed up to. But it is only a stepping stone, and there's a real challenge there in moving from just putting information out there to having it in a format and being able to be distilled by users, including communities.
Brilliant. Thank you very much both for that. So what I'm hearing there is there's transparency, but there's also accessibility as well, in terms of actually being able to comprehend what on earth is said in those 193 pages or however many they were, for example, in the example contract that you cited there. So Michael, Tim and Mocha, thank you so much for your wonderful inputs to today's session. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, guys. Fantastic. Cool. So that then takes us into the final session with regards to this morning's, well, I should say the final talk with regards to the second session of 8 with regards to this week's conference. And this comes from the fantastic George Don from Guyana. So now we're going to move to the world of manganese and really hear from someone who knows what they're talking about. Thank you very much. Take it away, Rose. And Rose, we can't hear the sound, just so you're aware. Just while we're retrying that, please do keep the questions coming into the chat, and we'll be able to answer them perhaps in this little interlude as well. On we go. Should we try again, Rose?
Guyana Metals.
Perfect.
To discuss the particular supply chains around manganese and their project in Botswana. George? What do you want to discuss with us today?
Hi, Ludwig. What we'd like to discuss today is essentially the positioning of small mining companies in the transition supply chain. As you said, I work for a company called Guyana Metals. We have a portfolio of manganese projects in southern Botswana. We're developing these projects to produce a particular battery grade chemical that will be used in the construction of EV batteries. So we produce a commodity called high purity manganese sulfate monohydrate. This is a precursor chemical which will go into the construction of a cathode for a lithium ion battery. So anybody who's familiar will sort of be aware of things like NMC chemistry, so nickel, cobalt, manganese, which are the sort of the majority of EV batteries used at the moment. So just like nickel, just like cobalt, just like lithium, just like graphite, high purity manganese is a battery chemical. And like a lot of these other sort of precursor materials, the processing, so taking it from the ore, so as you kind of see in the picture behind me, that's what a sort of a manganese ore body might look like. But taking that through to the production of a high purity battery grade chemical, most of that is still done in China. So about 90 to 95% of all the processing capacity for manganese to produce this high purity sulfate form comes out of China. And outside of China, there's actually really only one company that is in commercial operation. So we're looking to be only the second such company to be able to take ore and produce a battery grade chemical that can then feed into the transition industry as being part of the supply chain for the large automotives looking to increase their EV supplies.
Excellent. Sorry. Well, I like what you're saying, because of course it immediately feeds into the notion of diversifying the the supply sources for these critical minerals for the green energy transition, which is a key part of the critical minerals agenda both in the EU and the US. And how do you think your project features in that sort of wider issue, and more importantly, where do you see a possible ripple effect both at the national level and perhaps even wider?
So there's been a a huge drive recently, particularly by the EU, the US, sort of large countries looking to be able to sort of start decarbonizing their industries. And obviously the transportation industry has been a particular focal point. And so, where a company like us fits in, obviously we're producing a material that will go into this EV transition, but also we provide a valuable source of diversification away from kind of essentially the dominance that China has. So not only is this obviously sensitive from an industrial standpoint, so our kind of customers who might be the likes of a Tesla or a VW or a Ford, they obviously have big concerns around their supply chain security when faced with any sort of part of their chain that is dominated by a particular country or a particular provider. They're obviously looking for additional sources. But there are sustainability issues as well. They are being very heavily regulated, and so they must be able to provide certainly now a larger degree of due diligence, more sustainability around their supply chains. And it's harder to enforce that when you don't have total transparency. And typically, getting good quality data, getting good due diligence out of China is very difficult. It's very much geared towards their own domestic industry. And as it pertains to a company like ours, we are looking at a particular process route to produce our product, which is very sustainable and low carbon. So we're going directly from our ore straight to the battery chemical. Most of the industry doesn't do that. It goes through an alternative route where it requires electro-refining. It also requires the use of some quite toxic chemicals like selenium. If they're not treated and then handled and stored safely, they can be very dangerous. Now, that's a big challenge, obviously. If you're now asking for the vast quantities of new materials like ours, which the EV industry is going to be doing over the next few years, how do you meet those two challenges of making sure you source material, first of all, but then making sure that it is sustainable? And if it's coming from perhaps an older, more traditional source using less sustainable routes, how do you kind of push that change through whilst not making it uneconomic for the producer? So new entrants like ours, there's an opportunity there for the end users to not only diversify, but also improve practices and start to feed in these sustainability hurdles, into our production processes. So we are transparent because we're a listed company. We're listed on the TSXV in Canada. Obviously, we have to put out a large amount of disclosure. We have a website. People are free to come and view our project whenever they like. So we're a good opportunity for them to be able to improve the quality of their supply chain. But it also puts a huge amount of it puts a huge burden on us in terms of having to bear all of that as a small company. And in terms of kind of the ripple effect, this is the critical metals, so those that are going to be used in this energy transition, this decarbonization. These are particularly, usually not materials that were particularly well known or in high demand before this. Manganese, the vast amount of manganese is used in the steel industry, just the same with nickel is used in the copper, used in the stainless steel industry. Cobalt didn't have a huge number of practical uses, sort of nor lithium before this transition arrived. So now all of a sudden, economies and countries are looking at these new opportunities. So Botswana, we're lucky that Botswana is a very well-run and very mining-friendly environment, because from independence they've had a joint venture with De Beers and the Debswana joint venture, where they've been the government itself has been involved in the mining industry for decades. So they understand it. They know the difficulties that small mining operations face. The legislative framework there is very well understood, and the communities understand mining because obviously it's a big employer and it's a huge contributor to GDP. But over-reliance on any one commodity is always dangerous. So the government is very, very keen to diversify, obviously very keen to try and pivot into new opportunities. And they very clearly identified the battery industry as being something they can pivot to because they have resources of things like manganese, as well as nickel, copper. So there's huge support that we see, at a local level for our project, because it's part of the government's agenda to try and diversify away from precious stones. And it can help lead a chain within there, whereby, for instance, we can push for more renewable power to be part of the overall energy matrix. And the understanding that we have and the knowledge base that we develop in putting together the processing capacity to get it from the ore to the actual chemical, which is in itself a new element for most mining companies to have to navigate. If you can capture that, then you can export that knowledge base anywhere. Botswana sits very close to South Africa, obviously, as its next door neighbor, and South Africa has an extremely well-defined hydrometallurgical, pyrometallurgical, and mining technical resource, which it exports around the world. Well, this is an opportunity for countries like Botswana to seize that kind of IP and be able to export that as well.
Thanks so much, George. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that effectively a small company is currently breaking some barriers, which could then have, knock-on positive impact for other projects and the region widely, as well as the supply chain. I think my last question for you will focus on just that, which is, to what extent do you think that this is being understood, valued, and recognized by the ecosystem around a company like yours? Is this necessity of, for small companies to sometimes have to reorganize how they work and how they connect to their market, is that something that's currently well recognized and understood?
I'd have to say no. It's really not, and I'd say it's all the way through the industry. So we even ourselves, I think that it's taken us a while to really understand the fact that we are not a mining company. We're more of a processing or chemicals company. The mining part of our business is actually very straightforward. The deposit is not challenging. It's high grade, which means that it's not an awful lot of tons that we have to pull out of the ground to process. The challenge is that we are looking to build and operate a chemicals plant, the likes of which really there's only one other example outside of China. And we're not using Chinese technology. We're not looking for them to come in and build a plant for us. We're doing this all ourselves. So that in itself is a huge burden for any small company to manage, because we have a $50 million market cap. The market treats us like an authentic exploration or pre-development mining company. So we carry still quite a lot of technical risk, which means that our profile only really fits a particular type of investor, somebody with a large risk appetite looking for a high return. And that understanding of what we really are, and this doesn't just apply to us, it applies to an awful lot of small companies now looking to go into the battery space where unless you're a lithium company and you're mining spodumene concentrate that you'll look to sell off, that you'll look to pass on to a processor. What the industry is asking of us is we don't want people continuing to feed the Chinese processing machine. We want them to develop their own processing outside of China. So we want you guys not just to be mining companies, we want you to be chemical companies. But at the moment, we're treating you just like other mining companies. So until you have a minimum amount of documentation, technical documentation, you can give us like a feasibility study, or some kind of, example of product production, then I'm afraid there's nothing we can do for you. You're just a high risk exploration company. Once you get those things, well, there are certain pockets of capital that you can access, but even those require quite a high level of technical understanding, or, a higher the normal appetite for risk, bearing in mind that we're looking to produce a product that is a consumer commodity. It's not, you won't find the price listed in the LME, you won't really find any price visibility at all. So how do you take a view on our revenue generation potential, our ability to navigate the supply chain? So the industry itself is still not really appreciative of what companies like us are going to be asked to do, how we're going to finance ourselves, and how the kind of structure revolves around us. And you very vocal sort of advocates like Elon Musk go around saying, there's a problem with the mining industry, there's a problem with lithium supply, lithium prices are crazy and all this. And he's right. And there's, some in the mining industry get a bit defensive about, well, he doesn't understand mining, but that might not be the point. The point is that at the moment, we've got the same kind of investors who look to invest in base metals or precious metals, which are very well understood, with a long legacy of development and success, now asking to come into an industry where the commodities are not very well understood, the processing is definitely not understood, and the actual sales mechanics are not understood. So there's an element to which we are facing difficulties with our own investors, and that the industry and the structure of the finance industry as a whole. They layer on top of that we're trying to sell a particular commodity where we're only looking to sell high purity manganese sulfate that can only really go to the battery industry, which means selling ultimately to the car companies. Do they understand what they're asking of us? Do they understand when they're passing down this legislation and this essentially sitting back from it, that we're going to have to, take that on ourselves, a small company like us? And I think there's a perception that mining, when people think about mining, they think about big operations. They think about the Rio Tintos and BHPs. The Rio Tintos and BHPs will struggle to get involved in the battery industry to any great degree unless there are big resources there that they can really tap into. A small project like ours isn't big enough really to attract any interest. So it's going to be the smaller end of the market that has to take this on. So at the moment, I think it will be an evolution, just as we're learning what we are by nature now, that we're being asked to take on this processing leg that we never had before. And we'll be the first mining company in Botswana to process a finished product in country. Everything else, tends to be concentrates or stones going out for polishing, refining elsewhere. We're going to be the first mining company to actually produce a finished product that'll go directly to customers, straight into their cathodes. So this is something different for the country that we're working in as well. So there's going to have to be this evolution. There's going to have to be this broadening of understanding, and it needs to happen pretty fast because the volumes that are being asked of battery companies like us, battery developers, are vast, and the amount of time taken to start mines, to start processing facilities, to do your test work, to do your verification, I think there's still this lack of appreciation. And anyone starting a project like ours now, you will struggle to be in production before 2030. So when you think about the demand that's coming on over the next 5 years, and the fact that no one else really starting to develop a project like ours now will be able to feed into the next 5 years, that's something which I think a lot of the industry doesn't really appreciate.
Thanks, George, for illustrating so clearly how necessary mining is to the transition, but also the real change in mind frame and mechanics around the industry and all the way down the supply chain for mining to be able to play that role. So thank you very much for discussing that with us today. And we look forward for more great news from Guiani Metals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. Thank you for inviting.
Awesome. So thank you so much to George and to the lovely Ludovine who carried out that interview late last week. So round of applause to all of you. Brilliant. Well done. Well done. You're almost wearing the same top, Ludovine. Almost. I mean, stripy top, you're in France, can we get
it's an obsession. Sorry.
Fantastic. Excellent. So that then actually brings to a close all of our specific speakers and their talking slots that we've had in the second of 8 sessions within our Responsible Raw Materials Conference this week. So what I'd like to do is to invite all of our fabulous speakers who are still with us to turn on their cameras and if possible their microphones as well, depending on what dogs are doing, etc. in the background. Now, some of our fabulous speakers have had to drop off because they've got other meetings, for example, or things that they needed to get on with. There we go. We've got Alexandra coming back with us as well, which is fantastic. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go around the room and say, okay, so we've been sitting here listening to one another, actually maybe taking a leaf out of the Fair Cobalt Alliance's book where we said, okay, let's listen to all of those different voices in the room. What are some of those things that we have heard? So Alexandra, maybe if there is a specific point or something that you'd like to accentuate with regards to this discussion we're having here this morning, let's start off with yourself and then we'll go to Tim.
Okay. Yeah, and what I was going to mention was related to what Tim had mentioned and about the transparency. And I think one of the issues that we also encounter a lot is legalization of mine sites. So the term legalization has to be taken a bit lightly because there's different ways that it is seen at the local level, the provincial level, and the national level. So for a mine to be legal, it needs to kind of have that title of ZEA, so Zone d'Exploitation Artisanale, given by the National Ministry of Mines. But a lot of mines, artisanal mine sites in Kolwezi, do not have the national recognition, but do have the provincial one, because a lot of the ZEAs given at the national level to the cooperatives do not necessarily have the minerals on those sites. You know, they're geologically, given or geographically given to cooperatives, but, no studies has been done on the geology of those sites. So which pushes the cooperative not to want to work on those, well-defined ZEAs. So I believe that if there was more transparency on exactly, where are the ZEAs, what are the information that the government has on those, the geological information that they have on those sites, it would really help into, formalizing a bit more that sector. So, but it is true now that, let's say the formalization, not the formalization, but putting online all those information, it's something that has not yet been done. And just because digitalization is not yet developed, that much in the DRC, it's only, in the past 2 years or 3 that we have a ministry that is in charge of that. So, for it to be already implemented at a national level prior to be sent to the provincial level, it's a bit of a complication. But it is important really to kind of think of a way to really share the information from to the local population, or to have a better communication even within the government on the legalization of those mine sites. So I really believe what you were mentioning about the transparency and the sharing of information, the accessibility of those information is very key. And if we're able to reach that level, there's a lot of things that would be able to change for the ASM sector.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Alexandra. And actually, let's just go with the flow of the conversation here. So that's something in terms of accessibility to that information, especially when you then roll in not just, I guess, what is the legal status of that patch of land, but then also things like the geoscience. So actually what's going on with the geology. A country that does that really well is Canada. Now, I noticed, I think, Tim, the map that you showed, it was either Tim or Michael, I can't quite remember, my apologies. You showed a map of the world with where in the world have contracts actually been shared. And I think that Canada was still coloured in white rather than a tan colour. Is there something in that? Because it's just a case there of, so from a geoscientific perspective, Canada's brilliant because they make so much of their geological information freely available. So if you want to go and have a look at those data sets from a computer, it's quite easy to do. And I don't know if that then includes things like the licenses and permits and things.
The resourcecontracts.org website does not have anything for Canada.
It's really interesting.
So it's an interesting way. It's not actually a jurisdiction that Michael and I have done anything on. We've done work on Latin America and the Caribbean. I can tell you that the resourcecontracts.org website has the grand sum total of 2 documents for the United States of America, and nothing for Canada, which is quite interesting. So it's not, the divide between countries where there is existing transparency and where there isn't does not fall along developed and developing countries. It doesn't fall along countries with significant extractive sectors or less significant, or even along lines of jurisdictions with a long history extractive activities and being newer. I think, sort of coming back to the previous comment, I think that context is really important, and context is really important at both ends of that kind of transparency type chain. So it's really important when it comes to understanding what and how do you make things like, whether it's contracts or whether it's beneficial ownership or whatever it might be, that kind of, or tax numbers, whatever it might be that you're trying to kind of instill transparency. Context is really important at the start of that kind of information chain, if you like, because the challenges around, you know, whether information is available electronically or digitally, or whether actually it's a room full of paper, can be a huge challenge. Whether or not a country has a federal system where there is a lot of autonomy within particular regions of a country to potentially issue or amend licenses or collect taxes or enforce environmental standards or whatever it might be, means that actually maybe some kind of centralized transparency becomes really difficult, because the owners of some of that information are regional governments, and therefore getting buy-in is that much harder. So there are kind of challenges contextually at the beginning of that chain, but there are also then challenges at the end of that chain, which is, how do you move from having thousands and thousands of documents online to something which is accessible to communities that are maybe a long way away from the capital, maybe rely on getting their information about ESG type topics to do with things in their community from social media, from very kind of tightly packaged bits of information. You know, you're not going to look at 190 pages of the license between Total and the government of Mexico, which that, you know, on your mobile phone. But there are ways in which you can communicate actually what are contracts with extractives companies about, what do they say, what do they do, and what do they mean for you as communities, in ways that do work for people in those environments and those communities. Because, you know, so I think there are challenges that at both ends of that. There's a challenge in getting this kind of information. There's also a challenge in communicating it in such a way that works with communities who are most interested in it.
Great, thanks very much for that, Tim. Tim, do you have any other just comments in general, having sat here and listened to the variety of talks and sharing this morning? And then I'll go to Michael.
Well, funnily enough, that was the one I was going to make, and you led into it beautifully. Which is, what I was going to say is that actually, you know, that what I think we've heard in a lot of situations here is that the context is really important. Whether the context is the distinction between, you know, ASM operations and sort of larger operations which sit within a much tighter governance framework, or whether it is you know, the different initiatives around transparency and governance, whether it's, you know, what EITI is or isn't doing, and how that. So I think that's kind of the one that's come to me throughout, has been the importance of all of these things of context.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tim. Michael, any comments from yourself?
First of all, I'd like to pick up on why Canada might be a white spot on that map. It may be for very good reasons, that it's all online anyway, and the organisation behind resourcecontracts.org is a civil society organisation. I know they prioritised which countries they focused on, and Canada probably isn't, for the best reasons. Canada isn't worth the effort, as it were, and it's all online anyway. Maybe, you know, you could say they should have provided a link saying, if you're interested in Canada, here's where you can find everything online. Possibly similar with countries, maybe not the US, but for example, the UK, a lot of the license documents and everything is accessible online. Doesn't help if you don't have digital access, but anyway, we'll park that. One of the points I wanted to kind of pick up on and expand on one of the points in the chat about, I think Pauline made it about kind of responding to historic injustices and sorting those out. Unfortunately, and particularly in the context of EITI is not set up for that, and that was not its purpose. I mean, it was born out of a desire to sort out corruption and past injustices, particularly in Angola, which still has only just got around to joining EITI. But anyway, So it is, in that sense, more forward-looking. It's trying to prevent future injustices rather than sort out past injustices. And it has come under criticism for not doing that, not kind of sorting out some past issues. But it is primarily designed to kind of prevent, provide a transparency and be forward-looking in that sense, and prevent further future transparencies. One of the issues with that, though, is that it often comes down to budgets, and if anybody's got some good solutions for this and knows foundations or otherwise with deep pockets, often there is an imbalance between the work EITI is trying to do, if you like, the scale of the problem it's trying to tackle, and the resources, both financial and otherwise, that it puts to the problem. So, we've all seen the issues. We've all seen the numbers where, they're saying X million, even X billion is lost due to corruption or to transfer pricing or whatever it is. And EITI budgets generally don't tend to go above the tens of thousands, maybe into the hundreds of thousands. And when you're trying to tackle issues on that scale and even more substantial, it's just, there is just an imbalance there. And EITI itself and others have not really ever found a solution to that. And obviously, then it's also a matter of time as well. So that's what I would. That's my comments for the moment.
So there's only so much capacity, I guess, with regards to all of that as well. So, if I may, Alexandra, if I come back to yourself and say, okay, so with regards to improving, I guess, the transparency and the quality of life that's lived by everybody who's got something to do with Cobalt. There are lots of people who are actively seeking to not buy their Cobalt from the DRC. And so therefore saying, okay, if we can source the Cobalt from somewhere other than the DRC, then we get extra bonus marks with regards to our sustainability criteria or whatever. And that's all fantastic. Now, of course, on the flip side of that is if the world moves away from the DRC, then that wealth that comes with it doesn't then get sparked and can't be distributed. Do you have, what are your comments with regards to that?
I think there are studies done every day on, making batteries without cobalt and this on and so forth. It's true, but as I said, 70% is a lot. It really is a lot coming from the DRC. And it is a system that is already in place. There are companies already in place here. And there's a lot of investments that has been done by those major companies. So would they just pack up everything and leave the DRC in a matter of a year or two? I do not believe so. But like I said, the ASM, I don't know how many of you have been to Kolwezi before, but Kolwezi is linked to mining. Everything in Kolwezi, you flying into Kolwezi, you already see those mines. So it is true a source of income, but it is also a way of life. These people have been mining for so many years, and it is really part of their way of life. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon that people, like companies, completely stop sourcing from DRC. But as I mentioned before, it's not. If we're complaining now about the working conditions of miners, now we can all imagine what it would be like if there's nobody buying from the ASM sector or just cobalt coming from DRC in general. It will cause many more factors to the sector and to the region and even to the country.
Thank you very much for that, Alexandra. I think it's a very good answer. So the last question I just want to pose before we go and do a final lap around the room is it's one that's been sitting in the Q&A since very early on today. And it asks about the colonialism or the historic colonialism of mining. And do we believe that some of what's happening at the moment is altering that? Now, of course, this can all be understood in many different ways. It's something that especially in universities, there's a lot of chatter with regards, or there's a lot of focus in on these areas. I think, and it's a shame that actually that we've lost all of our lovely people from the Philippines, from Ethiopia, etc., off the call just now, but we will go back and tie in on them. I don't know if, well, maybe Alexandra and Michael, do you guys have any thoughts with regards to that? Because I think we've heard, not necessarily focusing specifically on it, but lots of different aspects of that here today. Alexandra, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, in a way, obviously colonialism is always, there was always a link to mining and so on and so forth, because if you look at, you know, the different roads, it was usually taken from the mines all the way to the ports, and, you know, always ways for that the minerals to leave the country. But I believe that's maybe that is the part that we still have from colonialism, is that a lot of the minerals are not refined within the country. There's no transformation within the country. So in that sense, then yes, some of the you know, the colonial past is still present. And I believe that the Congolese government is really pushing towards now having, you know, refineries within the countries, and then assembling maybe of batteries. Why not having it within the countries? And I think last year, the end of last year, there was the DRC Business Forum, which focused a lot on green energy and batteries. And they are really working towards, you know, having all of that really being made within the DRC to ensure to have more people trained, more local people trained into the creation of batteries, or at least the assemblage of a lot of those battery and the refinery and so on. So steps are being taken, but like I said, when you get to that level, you would need the expertise as well. So that's why it would be important to really start then investing in the capacity building of the local communities in order to, you know, to get to that level. So there's a lot still that needs to be done, but yeah, that colonial past is still, you know, still has an impact today.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that, Alexandra. Ludovine, maybe if I bring you in on this now, because I know that George from Guyana, he was talking about where does that processing, for example, take place? And interestingly, describing Guyana not as a mining company, but as a chemicals processing company, which I'm seeing more and more often at the moment, people not describing themselves, but as chemical processing companies. And then where that chemical processing actually happens is the bit that can shift, because it doesn't really matter where you put that chemical plant from a context space. Obviously, the mine has to happen where the rocks are, but then where you do the processing, it becomes there are different variables, for example, that you can take into consideration. Do you have any thoughts on this, Ludovine? And then I'll come to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks to all the speakers for all this great input today. I think beyond the individual situation of a company deciding whether it's more profitable or more suitable to their market to process here or there, there's a real change afoot in terms of how we structure these businesses, how we think them, how we fund them. And I want to pick up on that word colonialism, because there is also a school of thought that highlights that mining is by essence colonial, not in terms of geostrategic positioning, but in terms of a mining company's, you know, traditional goal is to find a deposit, put a big fence around it, close off the rest of the world, and then do our thing and use that little space under the terms of a very conventional permit. A lot of that is changing. A lot of that, you know, you can't live behind the fence anymore. That interaction that needs to happen with, you know, much more informed social powers, with public authorities who have much more need to demonstrate that they're thinking about today's stakes as well as the future, with civil society that's both, yes, imposing pressure, but also creating opportunities. One of the points that was raised earlier is the complexity of organizing transparency. There are some really innovative proposals in some of the African countries where I've worked to structure this as a PPP involving various social groups or civil society organizations, including, for example, the Bar Association, along with the Mining Chamber, who with the mining administration together form a consortium to actually orchestrate the digitalization of these contracts, and even more so, explaining these contracts. So I think what I find interesting here is that there are a lot of solutions. Perhaps by linking them more, we work outside of our traditional structures and silos. And I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, so we're naturally conservative people who like how the system works. But, you know, there's a lot of discussion also about thinking, well, if ASM or smaller projects are going to be the key to critical minerals, maybe we need to rethink how we permit. Maybe a zone is not what you should be doing for ASM. Maybe we need to just acknowledge that ASM by nature is transitory, is moving, is, you know, today we'll do cobalt, but in 3 weeks, depending on pricing, maybe we'll shift 40 kilometers and do gold. Maybe all of us need to build in that flexibility, build in that kind of openness to these actors, because they are part of the market. And perhaps by, you know, opening up our structures, we create better opportunities for everyone in that context. So this is me being a bit of a revolutionary today, but I'm sure there's lots of different aspects that can feed into this.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that, Ludovine. I think that, yeah, as soon as you assume you know something, then challenge it, because actually there's probably a different way of doing it, for example. Michael, do you have any thoughts?
On the colonial question, not a huge area of expertise, but I mean, obviously it still has an impact in the sense that a lot of the, Alexandra's already alluded to this, but a lot of the power structures, the commercial structures, financing, and so forth, export, right, are all kind of laid down on patterns or on models set up during colonial period and haven't really been challenged ever since. They've just been kind of added on to. I think there's also a danger that obviously, as Ludovine's just pointed out, kind of them just being replicated. And you see that in this day and age with kind of more modern investors. China is the obvious one, but there are others who kind of, it's not called colonialism, but it has a lot of the same features and elements to it. And so there is a danger that countries just kind of repeat, if you like, some of the mistakes of the past, and not mistakes, but it's a model that's worked for decades, if not longer. So kind of, as Ludovine's point, why change it? But in a lot of cases, it does need change. That's all I would say on that point.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. So then just in closing, if we just go around our room just one more time, just any final words of wisdom that you want to leave everybody with before I wrap up the session and tee everybody else up for the next one. So Michael, any final words of wisdom? And then I'll go to Tim.
Nothing else from me, but just thank you for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to kind of carrying on the conversation with others outside of this event. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Tim, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Alexandra.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I suppose the only other observation is that, and it's one that I frequently have whenever we have our conversations, Sarah, in this or other forums, which is the extent to which there always seems to be an interconnection between all the different topics that we're discussing, even though they may not necessarily appear to be. Once we start discussing, we find that they all overlap each other and interconnect.
Yeah, and also where we're talking about the same thing, but calling it something different as well. So seeing all of that happen. Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Alexandra, how about yourself? And then I'll go to Ludovine.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. It was really interesting, and thank you for having me. And it's always interesting to see how we're all working in similar sector, but yet so different, and we complement our work, all complement one another. So it was a really good conversation to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. Ludovine, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Rose.
I'll echo the other speakers in celebrating the diversity of perspectives around this table, and I think it greatly adds to the discussion. I think the main point that strikes me is that we are facing an incredible climate emergency, a sustainability imperative, and of course, a lot of ESG expectations. And yes, that is a plug of the responsible raw materials, vision and tagline. In the face of all of those changes, I think, we need a lot of innovation and forward thinking and outside the box thinking. And I'm delighted to see so much of it happening here at Responsible Raw Materials.
Awesome. Thanks, Ludovine. And Rose.
I just want to say thank you firstly to everybody for joining us. I think we've been really lucky to have the diversity of perspectives that we have today. I think one thing that's really stuck out for me is that, accessibility is such an important thing to discuss when we think about the just transition. I think the energy transition is so often used as not a guise, but maybe a bit of a scapegoat and a bit of an excuse. And actually for the just transition, we need to have some more uncomfortable conversations maybe, and discuss things like colonialism, and they're conversations that can feel quite uncomfortable to have and can be very difficult to have in a way that everybody is happy with or comfortable with. So I just want to say thank you to all of the people who agreed to talk, because Responsible Materials, as Ludovine says, does really try to address these things, and we don't always necessarily know the best way to do so, but we want to have a good go at doing it. So thank you to everyone for being so honest and open and understanding that we're trying to do the right thing and coming on that journey with us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rose. So fantastic. So just with regards to that, building on what Rose has said there, and really trying to look for those elephants in the room, or look for those uncomfortable conversations, because and I know that there's some discussion that's going on online at the moment where people are going, you can't say this. And actually, okay, there might be some things that are really difficult to say, but we need to be able to put them on the table for discussion. And then we can all actually understand, okay, well, this is what it means to me. What does it mean to Alexandra, or to Michael, or to Tim, or to Ludovine, or to Rose? What are all of our perspectives, and actually having that empathy for one another and that respect for one another to say we can all have our own opinions, and then we can be constructive with regards to moving forward. So how do we find the constructive aspect within that, to say, okay, how do 7.5 billion people survive on this planet in a sustainable fashion? Because really that's what we're kind of talking about here, without destroying the world round about us. So with regards to that, the first session that we've got happening this afternoon, okay, so that will start at 3 o'clock UK time. Apologies to those of you in Australia, it's a horrible time for you, but to those of you in, say, Canada, etc., who are dialing in, and I'm sure watching this on recording just to catch up, maybe not, because it's still going to be fairly early in the morning. We start off with our Burst the Bubble session. So we've got 3 fantastically brave individuals, all of whom are self-confessed. They don't necessarily know what mining is. From their perspective, it might be the mining of Bitcoin rather than the mining of Cobalt. And for them, they know which questions vaguely that we're going to ask them, to actually just get them to tell us, well, what does this sector actually mean for them? Do they like it? Do they not like it? And why? So what's actually driving that opinion? So we do a Burst the Bubble session with 3 fantastic individuals who you'll meet this afternoon. And then we have a reflections on that session from some of our speakers who will be speaking later on in the afternoon, who will say, okay, so this is what we just heard. This is what we just learnt, because of course a conversation is a two-way dialogue. It's not just one person going, hey, this is what I think. Actually, you need to have people listening to you and receiving that information. By the way, Ludovine, I'm loving all of your sign language that's going on. It's truly brilliant. It's like, yes, we've got this two-way conversation that's going on here at the moment. So this afternoon, we start off with our Burst the Bubble session, and then, okay, cool. So what did we just hear? As uncomfortable as some of those messages might be, we then hear from Catherine McCallum, who was actually spoken about quite a lot earlier on today by Michael, who was talking about Catherine McCallum and the work she's doing with Akobo. Catherine's going to give a broader conversation with regards to some of the aspects she's been working on. Then we've got Andy Whitmore from the London Mining Network, and they are really good at holding normally large-scale mining, I guess, to account with regards to what's happening around the world. Then we've got Liz Friel from Simpact. So Liz is based in Vancouver and does a huge amount of work all around the world, again, predominantly on the social and the community sides of things. And then we've got Hershey, who's going to be dialing in from Dublin. So Hershey is she works in academia, and again, from the psychology and the social aspects, not just with regards to mining, but broader industry as well. And then finally, we're going to wrap up. We're going to bring in a little bit of the money bit again, and we're going to bring in Alice England and Mark Bishop Lafleche from Anglo-Pacific Group. So they are a royalties company. So they invest money in a slightly different way within the sector. So really, again, diverse opinions coming through this afternoon, and it'll be really interesting to hear what they've got to say. Just in final summary, do take a look at the full agenda that is on the website. So the same session tomorrow, we start off with A World of Rocks, which, I mean, I'm a geologist, so of course I'm really looking forward to this one. So this is where we're going to get insight into the updates that have been happening over the last year or so with regards to getting ESG and sustainability into the calculations that basically the geoscientists do to say, well, how much rock is in the ground that we're allowed to extract. So all of those disclosures, we're starting off in that world there. We've then actually got Mark Robinson from EITI. So you're going to have more transparency coming through. Look, Michael's raised eyebrows there, which will be fantastic. So I think that will really build on everything that Tim and Michael have shared today. We're then going to hear from Jamie Strauss from Digby. So this is a platform that endeavours to share the true ESG performance of mining companies, especially the smaller mining companies, with investors in the rest of the world. And then finally, we're finishing off with Christian Spano from the International Council for Mining and Metals, so the ICMM. And we're going to be joined, hopefully, by Ben Lepley, I think, in our panel session at the end of tomorrow morning's session. So tomorrow session at this time, another fantastic one. We hope to see all of you there. Tell all of your friends, bring them all along. And if you think that we are missing voices in this discussion, so who are we not listening to? Who are we not involving? Please tell us, because we will invite them into the room, because we really, really, really want to make sure that the discussion is as diverse and as challenging as possible. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see some of you back here at 3 o'clock UK time later on.